All right. So I guess we'll do another intro here. Welcome back, everyone. I think for you it would have been just another week of time. But for us it's been we went to sleep and woke up and decided to record another episode. So here we are. This time we're moving on to the Dread section of this breakdown of my video, right? Find it interesting to note that this person who made this video is pretty much only interested in bringing up my points in relation to Metroid Fusion and Dread, which I find was interesting because I think, at least to my ability to assess my own video, that I used pretty much the same kind of logic on every game in this series, and just trying to be as consistent as I can. Now, if there's points where I'm less consistent than other points, then I try to correct myself and things like that. But yeah, it's just interesting to see the fact that they're really only interested in critiquing those two sections of my video. Anyway, how you doing?
Hello
this
from me as well. Hello everyone, I'm doing great. Welcome to the first Comatose podcast episode, where we just crawled out of bed and dragged ourselves to the microphone to keep talking about Metroid Fusion and Dread and such things.
My voice probably gonna sound deeper for like a few hours.
My voice gonna be fine.
I'm gonna sound like God dang Morgan Freeman. Anyway, so yeah, I suppose we can just start with the beginning of the Dread section of this video.
I want to say one thing before we get started.
Oh yeah.
Because we are in the position to criticize Fusion, we have mostly been saying negative things about it last video, but I just want to quickly clarify that I do like Fusion, and it probably is one of my most played games ever. So, just to clarify it, we are not one-sided haters, but we do take issue with how Fusion is treating 2D Metroid.
Yeah,
that's the whole issue.
I replayed Fusion a lot.
Yeah, me too.
The thing is, like, the issues with it weren't really a problem or a focus point until I started seeing Fusion being used as the blueprint for every like modern 2D Metroid game after Zero Mission. Just the influence it has it's as if like Fusion is the Metroid game that established the entire series or something. So because of that, I'm looking at it with a much more scrutinous eye, and I'm looking at it through the lens of traditional Metroidvania, and that was really my purpose with featuring it in my long-form video, was to feature it in the context of this analysis on Metroid as a series, right? So
yes,
yeah, I went over Fusion with the same comb that I went over all the other games with. So anyway,
and now we're gonna do that with Dread. Apparently,
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Anyways, let's jump ahead to the main course. FM.Phazon's segment about Metroid Dread. There's a whole lot in between these two segments, but I don't care to discuss any of that, so we're jumping ahead.
This game is entirely comprised of what I call...
We kind of just leave it at, I don't care to discuss. Okay.
Okay.
Fast food Metroidvania. It takes any responsibility to think away from the player, allowing them to just do what's right in front of them. Now, it doesn't directly dictate the player's next destination, but the way forward is always in very close proximity to the player. The map may look like a complex puzzle, but once you realize what it's doing, it becomes as linear as Fusion, only without the map markers. Just like in Fusion, backtracking is kept out of the player's control. Anytime a new upgrade opens up something in an earlier area, there is always either a teleporter or a convenient elevator that leads you exactly where you need to go. I often overthought certain situations, assuming this game was going to be like every other Metroid. The game is designed in such a way that if you're ever thinking while you play, treating the world as a puzzle, you're actually worse off than someone who just blindly moves forward no matter what.
This game does deserve criticism for making it quite difficult to get lost, but Dread is not nearly as linear as Fusion. In addition to progression
Oh yeah, and when I say this, we're talking. It's me shooting myself in the foot again using the word linear, right? I have put more thought into this. Like I kind of just wish I never would have used that term at all, and just kind of come up with a new word for every type of linearity and just stuck to those words. So we have words for type 2 and 3, backtracking and sequence breaking, right?
Yeah.
So in that sentence, I can only assume that I was referring to type 2 linearity backtracking. Dread is about as linear as Fusion. When you notice that Dread kind of sections you off to small areas of the map so frequently, just like Fusion does, and so it just doesn't put waypoints on your map and tell you exactly like which room you need to be going to. But it
Fortunately.
does. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Fortunately, it doesn't
do that. But I mean, it is always just kind of almost automatic.
It's very apparent.
The way it filters you to the correct room, you know.
Yes.
So yeah.
dictated entirely by the player, this game has many sequence breaks and items to backtrack for.
Right.
The game does have moments of closing off older areas briefly, but this is nowhere near on the level of Fusion.
I think that's true. Nowhere near on the
Dread,
level of Fusion.
I would say, even though we are complaining that Dread isn't Metroidvania-ish enough, it's certainly a better Metroidvania than Fusion, I'm gonna say.
Yeah, I think he's taking issue with me saying as linear as Fusion, and really that complaint I think takes the form of what I had just said. Maybe it doesn't do things to the same extent that Fusion does, but it still is doing the same kind of bullshit that Fusion is doing.
The thing is,
just like sectioning off the map and all of that.
We wanted Metroid 5 to
intelligence to be respected.
we didn't want Metroid 5 to be a Metroidvania that is better than Fusion at being a Metroidvania. We wanted it to be a Metroidvania that is a better Metroidvania than Super Metroid.
It can be done. The thing about it is, like, even if it was as good as Super Metroid or as good as Zero Mission, like that would be fine even.
True.
Just like,
I'm just talking about the direction we want the series to take.
Yeah. It's like you're being led by the nose very, very frequently in Dread, you know?
Yes, the path forward is heavily telegraphed. There are a lot of occasions where you are being cut off from the rest of the world, so you don't accidentally go exploring in an area where there is no way to progress. There's a lot of teleporters to make backtrack and traversal easier.
Yeah, and I gotta say, it feels like whenever I play a Metroid game and I see this intentional dead end that the developer put in where it's like I can't go back to where I just came from, it feels like a immediate insult, like an immediate vote of no confidence in the player, where it's like, no, you can't be trusted to be responsible for your own navigation. We need to take over. It's like you're taking something away from me, you know?
I agree.
That's why it feels so insulting when this happens.
Yeah, it feels really patronizing.
It's a message from the developers to me saying you can't be trusted.
They don't want you to figure out the puzzle that is the world. They want you to feel as if you figured it out. They're basically performing a magic trick. It's an illusion. You think you're being smart
it doesn't
and
fool
finding
me
your
for
way.
even a second. Like, the
That's
second I
that's
see
the
that
issue.
locked door, I'm like, oh, fuck you. You know?
Pretty sure this magic trick is gonna work on somebody who has never played a Metroid game before. They're probably gonna love it.
Yeah.
But this is Metroid 5, and we have several remakes and spin-offs and the Prime series, so it's more like Metroid 10 or 12 or something.
Yeah.
And we're still being led by the hand so much. Why?
Like, I can...
Look at Prime just re-released and people love it. Breath of the Wild is entirely open and it's the best-selling Zelda game ever, selling more than every other 3D Zelda game combined.
Yeah.
Why can't 2D Metroid have enough trust in the player where you are supposed to figure something out?
I mean, think about this. Minecraft, a game with almost zero tutorials, zero hand-holding, manages to be one of the most popular games, and people get through it, and people know how to beat it. There are people, I think they end up, you know, finding wiki articles and stuff like that in order to like progress through the game. But I mean, the game itself doesn't prevent you from just doing whatever the fuck you want, you know?
Hollow Knight was also a big success.
Exactly. There's that. Hollow Knight.
People are very excited for Hollow Knight Silksong, and I don't think they are excited because they hope Silksong to hold their hand.
Right. And it may be that it's not that they're having a vote of no confidence in the player as much as they're having a vote of no confidence in their world design, maybe. I don't know.
Which is unfortunate because Dread proves that Mercury Steam knows how to make good level design. They're just using it wrong.
That's how I felt with the scan pulse in Samus Returns. It's like they're telling me that they have no confidence in exploration at all. They're like, no, you're gonna get bored. We need to give you this cheat tool, right?
Yeah, and really you didn't need it. The world of Samus Returns is pretty decent for, you know, allowing you to explore and find your way yourself. It's not like the game becomes unplayable if you refuse to use the pulse radar or whatever
and the whole
it is
thing
called.
about like, oh, just don't use it. It's missing the entire point, right? Like you can play like, I don't know, a Souls game. Like imagine in Metroid Dread, you're given this item that will skip any boss battle.
Yes.
And it's just like, oh, well, just don't use it. Well, motherfucker, like anyone's gonna use it, especially if they get frustrated by the boss battle. So it's like you're depriving people of what the intended experience is by giving them an ability to skip parts of it.
You also alter the experience of the challenge or difficulty, because if you're giving such a powerful tool and you're expected not to use it, then now it's a self-imposed challenge.
Yes.
That's a completely different feeling from actually having a challenge in front of you which cannot easily be, you know, circumvented.
It's not up to the player to create their own experience by abstaining from something that the developers included, you know?
Yes, if you get lost in Samus Returns because you can't find the bombable block, then you know subconsciously that this is the result of yourself making it harder for you than it needs to be. You're in the mindset of a player playing a video game. You're not in Samus's shoes, because Samus doesn't travel to this planet to find a nice challenge, to occupy herself. She's on a mission. Mm-hmm. If she were to find a button in the very first room of the planet, which says, "Press me to fix all problems," she would press that button. Mission accomplished. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't make for an enticing game. So ideally, you don't want a disconnect between Samus and the player.
And this extends to glitch exploits. I was watching EFAP talking about Scorn, and apparently in Scorn, there's several places where you can just cheese enemies and not actually have to deal with them.
Huh.
And he was saying like that's on the developers. That's not on me. You can't tell me my immersion was broken because of my own actions. They should have prevented that from being possible. Like, of course, if I don't want to lose health, I'm going to cheese the enemy. I'm going to use whatever strategy is available to me. It's not up to the player to tailor the game to their own experience by just refusing to use certain strategies, you know?
It's also almost hypocritical. On one way, they are saying, you are responsible for making the game harder for yourself so you get your Metroidvania challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other way, on the other side, the game is clearly communicating to you, trust us, we are gonna forge this experience for you. Just follow the red line. We are gonna direct this
Follow
experience.
the adventure line.
Yeah, so basically the game, Dread is telling you to, follow the developer and the intended route,
Yeah.
and play as they want you to play. And if you complain that this experience isn't very fun, then the fan base is gonna tell you, well, you were supposed to not listen to the developers.
You were supposed to sequence
break.
Yeah. Like,
Is this like a sick meta joke? Is this like Metal Gear Solid 2? Are your expectations ruined?
sorry, that was a phone alarm.
Welcome back, my friend.
Yeah, like, sequence breaking is one thing, but like the base experience is also, you need to have that respect the player's intelligence as well. It's not just sequence break and then you'll have your deeper experience, right? Because
The sequence breaking in Dread is cool.
it's
That's
cool.
That's the one Metroidvania related aspect in Dread that's really successful.
It's
But-
there. It's fine. I think it's better that it has it, right?
Yeah, but it should be standing off a base of actual Metroidvania groundwork.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be
Yes.
like, this is basically fusion, but if you want to break it, you can feel a hint of Super Metroid in there. No, it should already be Super Metroid.
You're
Even
right.
if you're not
That's
trying
exactly
to
the
sequence
point.
break.
Like,
Yes.
other games have sequence breaking as well.
Even Prime has it.
Like,
It's
think about
probably an exploit, but
like, I mean, if you want to get technical, Mario's warp pipes are sequence breaking.
yeah. Yeah.
So the base game though that you're playing is not a Metroidvania. It's a Mario game. But like the fact that you can break the sequence of the game doesn't suddenly turn it into this non-linear experience, you know what I mean?
Yes.
It doesn't suddenly take the base game and turn it into something it's not. So that's kind of what's happening with Dread here. It's a very like type 2 linear experience. And so that would that's just like the baseline. And so like being able to sequence break doesn't suddenly transform that base experience into something it's not.
Yeah.
Like,
The thing is,
maybe you can
Prime-
skip cutscenes. Maybe you can skip cutscenes. Maybe you can skip certain item collection orders, but you're still gonna be placed at some point during this into this very linear progression system.
the thing is,
yeah,
Prime doesn't have any sequence breaking to speak of, basically.
yeah.
It has a very linear progression system, which is one of its biggest flaws.
Type 3
flaws,
linearity. Type 3
But-
linearity.
Despite the fact that you cannot even sequence break in Prime, even without the ability to sequence break, you're still gonna have a very explorative and open experience.
Yes.
Dread has sequence breaking. If we assume you're not gonna use that, you're gonna play it like Prime, you're gonna follow the item order, you're not gonna have a very open and explorative experience.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
So I think Yeah, so it's kind of like asking. So there's this other problem the game fixes that that it's kind of like expected that being there is going to solve this other problem over here when they're two separate problems. I think that's the core of the issue. These are two separate problems. Sequence breaking and backtracking are two separate problems. Dread solves one of them, but then leaves the other one unsolved. Prime solves one of them, but leaves the other one unsolved. And all I'm saying is, I put more weight on Type 2 than I do Type 3, simply because it feels like the player's intelligence is being respected with Type 2.
Also, don't forget the other type, which is number of options and even wrong options to go. In Dread, you're often presented with only one path forward, and if you find a different door, it will often be immediately blocked. In Prime, you're often allowed to go through the wrong door, and then you maybe walk a couple rooms
make it
ahead.
A bit forward, and then
Yes. And then you notice, whoops, that was wrong. But I learned something. Here's some kind of...
You might get some lore.
I don't know.
You might get some... even an item if you're lucky, you know?
Or maybe you see a spider ball track and you're like, oh, curious, what is this? I'm gonna remember that later on.
Yeah. This is a surprise tool that will help us later.
Yes. And in Dread, you don't get that all that much. In Dread, it's more like you're always running forward, and if you're expected to go somewhere else, the game will conveniently bring you there, and then sprinkle some, energy tanks.
It'll just so happen that your path will lead you there. It's like, again, what I was saying is literally, if you're treating Dread as if it's an actual like puzzle, as if there's something to figure out, you're going to be worse off than someone who actually just blindly moves forward, as if there's just in blind faith that the developers will direct them in the right way. Like someone that is going to have a much easier time playing Dread.
I got stuck for a short while on my very first playthrough because I collected an upgrade which I immediately knew where to use.
It happened to me 2 or 3 times.
I knew how to get there, so I tried to backtrack.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me like 30 minutes, 45 minutes or so to realize that all paths I had used before were now cut off. And I was kind of like, this is really strange. My Metroidvania instincts tell me I should have gone back here because now I have the item that I needed before.
Yeah.
But I can't progress here, so I go back to the item room where I picked the item up and just walk forward, and boom, immediately there's an elevator or a teleporter or something behind there, which puts me back where I needed to be.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
The teleporters, it's so blatant. Like, it's just like they had no other solution. They're just like, yep, we're just going to put you right where you need to be.
Yes.
Like,
yes, which is unfortunate.
Even with if they didn't have the teleporters, that would instantly improve this game, because there would be at least some points where you can use your noggin, right?
Yeah. And it would feel more natural, too. You would never break the logic of the space to have you teleport somewhere.
There are some teleports where they take you somewhere you've never been before, though. So there's that.
Yeah, but that still breaks up my mental map, basically.
Yeah.
If they want to have a shortcut, put a shortcut there, but have me run through it.
There was no reason not to physically connect the areas, you know?
That's what I'm saying, yes. And you can have a couple of teleporters. Echoes have some for quick travel, and there's one secret teleporter in Corruption.
Yeah.
Even 2. But in Dread, it's basically like they wanted an elevator where it isn't logically feasible, so they just put a teleporter there.
Yeah. So I think we've talked a lot about Dread so far, and I think we've already addressed some things that are going to come up in a few seconds with the audio here. You wanna keep listening?
We got ahead of ourselves.
We did get ahead of ourselves, but we did it naturally. So
yes.
Metroid also closes areas off, and forces you to fight the main bosses in a mostly set order.
Oh, he's talking about Super Metroid, which closes areas off, and I think he's specifically referring to is that part at the top of Brinstar, or at the top of the long not an elevator shaft, it's just a shaft, where there's a one-way door, right?
Yes.
And the thing about that is, like, yes, you're closed off for all intents and purposes, especially if you don't know how to wall jump. You're gonna be going until you get either the wave beam or you're going to get the ice beam, which will let you go up to get the power bombs and actually leave Brinstar. The thing is, it's not especially well hidden, the fact that you, like, if you know how to wall jump, you can get up to that powerbomb area pretty easily. Maybe not the easiest thing in the world, but it's still much easier than most of the Dread sequence breaks, at least easier to identify than most of the Dread sequence breaks, especially early on in your play through career of Super Metroid, you know.
Also, the part which you are trapped in is a much bigger part. It's like one-third of the game or something.
You are trapped in a very large part of the game, yes. And so, like, Super Metroid does that, and that's like the only time that it does anything like that, isn't it? I can't think of another time when Super Metroid just locks you into an area like that. It does so with the ice beam, right? When you bless you, when you speed boost through the doors that shut on you,
No.
you're not gonna leave that area until you acquire the ice beam and get through that platforming section. But I kind of had made a distinction between, you know, there's some areas in pretty much every Metroid where it's like you're not going to leave until you've discovered how to use a certain item. And I think that is fine because that is like a hidden tutorial is what that is. It's not necessarily guiding you, hand-holding you through the game, telling you what the answers are, you know? It's more so
Yes.
it's more so just kind of like a filter, just making sure you are definitely aware of how this upgrade works before you can leave.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do make a distinction between those two. So yeah, Super Metroid doesn't really, it does it like once, and Dread's doing it like all the time. Fusion does it all the time. So
Fusion and Dread are not as similar as you make it out to be. Super and Dread are not as dissimilar as you suggest.
and we'll just have to get into the specifics to actually address this point.
Saying this game requires less macro-scale thinking than Super to progress on the main path is fair,
Okay.
but saying this game punishes it is simply untrue.
This game definitely does not reward you for macro scale thinking. You're going to be
basically
wasting a
don't-
lot of time. If you're macro scale thinking in the wrong place, you're going to be wasting a lot of time.
Yeah, it can be counterproductive. And I remember saying something in a Metroid Discord server which people actually agreed to me to. I basically said Metroid Dread is like a Metroidvania for people that have issues with their long-term memory. You don't need long-term memory to play Metroid Dread.
That's great.
If you forget what you've been doing the last hour, just
goldfish
follow the path.
Metroidvania.
Yes. It's kind of like
God.
I told you I'm introducing someone to Metroid through Metroid Prime, her first Metroid game ever.
Yeah.
And since we haven't seen each other in 2 weeks, there was a long break between her first session and her second session of playing Prime.
Mm-hmm.
And she kind of was like, I forgot what I did last, I don't know what I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
That can be a problem in Prime, which is
can.
why I reminded her the last thing you did was collect this item, and now you can kinda do this. Maybe
But
you remember.
Here's the thing. That's a problem
the
with
point-
any of these kind of games.
No, it's not. It's not a problem with Dread. You can completely forget what you did 2 weeks ago, just load your save file and keep running to the right.
I'm saying any of these games that just give you so much freedom, yeah, of course, like, if you leave it alone a while and you just forget what all you did, you're going to have a hard time remembering what it was you were planning on doing.
Yeah,
but that's
my point
something
is
that's
that
like that's a worthy cost of this genre, because the rewards
No,
are
I'm
so...
not.
What?
You misunderstand. I'm not even complaining about this phenomenon. I'm saying it speaks a lot about Dread that this doesn't occur with Dread. You can start a playthrough of Dread now, play for 2 hours, save, and leave the game alone until you have forgotten where you've been, and then just reload your save file, and you will immediately lead forward. You don't need to remember what you did, what upgrades you have. Just follow the path.
So you're saying that's a detrimental thing. I'm saying it could be viewed as a positive thing for people who easily forget things.
No, I need to disagree. It cannot be spinned in a positive light, in my opinion. Because that's a macro level thinking. If you're thinking about the entirety of the game, then you need to remember most parts of it.
Yeah.
If you cannot remember it, then you cannot make decisions about the whole game.
Yeah.
The fact that you don't need to remember anything in Dread tells you how unimportant macro-level thinking is in Dread.
Okay.
I could pick
I see
up
what
a
you're saying.
save file.
I get what you're saying. That's you're using that as evidence of the lack of any macro scale thinking. I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yes. I could pick up a save file from any other person, which I haven't watched playing, and I could continue their save file.
I believe anyone could pick up a save file from any other person and just keep playing.
Exactly. Even if you haven't played Dread before. You can start the game in the middle of it, and after maybe 10 minutes of running around, you will find your path again. And then you will just be led all the way to the ending.
Exactly. And I was going to say, this is something Other M does. So I came up with the term fast food Metroidvania when I was doing my Other M retrospective, because there was a certain point in Other M where you are faced with a locked door, and what you end up doing is finding this very obvious open pathway that will lead you in so many corridors, dirt tunnels, everything like that, miles away from where you were. And then it will throw boss battles at you. It'll throw like turrets at you. It'll throw worms at you. And then when you finally get through all of that, you're going to find a computer terminal, which when you press the button, it will unlock the door. And then you'll fight another worm gauntlet, and then you will enter there's going to be a morph ball tunnel, very obviously outlined by the cinematic camera, and it'll show you that there's a speed boost bomb slot in that morph ball tunnel, and you'll activate that, and then it will blast you all the way back to that one room with the locked door. Well, it'll blast you right next to that room with the locked door. So essentially what happens is the player is strung along by the nose without being given any direction of there's no connecting tissue for like why they need to be going down this path, and eventually they will come across just this button and just be like, okay, I guess that's the unlock mechanism, and then they'll just be thrown back towards where they were. For me, I never even put it together that the game was trying to lead me to unlock that door. It essentially felt like a fever dream where it's just like stimulus just being thrown at me. So like I was like catatonic state. Like it did not require any thought on my part to get that door unlocked, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like it's like the closest that game gets to any sort of Metroidvania exploration, where you're not given an item that will unlock the door. You're not given, I don't know, any sort of scan module that'll unlock the door. You're just pressing a button that happens to be connected to that door, and it's just like it just doesn't require any knowledge of the player. You're not gonna backtrack to that door. You can actually just kind of forget that door exists and just keep going forward, just blindly, and it'll all work out.
Yeah.
So that's where I coined the term fast food Metroidvania, and then I just kind of reused that with Dread, because that seems to be all Dread does is kind of, you don't have to worry about what obstacle is in your way. All you have to do is just kind of like feel around nearby, and there's always going to be some kind of like key under the mat that will get you past the obstacle.
Yeah.
That's kind of a good analogy, I think. There's always going to be just like a key under the mat nearby, you know?
If you can't enter the house from the front, just walk around to the back and the door will be open.
Yeah.
The game rewards and incentivizes you with many expansions and many sequence-breaking opportunities.
Right, and here comes like the copium. But like
many expansions, where if we count those, then Metroid Prime is suddenly extremely non-linear, because it got so many energy tanks, missile tanks,
yeah,
power bomb containers, and 3 optional beam combos, plus the artifact hunt, which is completed non-linearly.
Yeah, and
I
just
was
like,
kind of
the fact
checking...
that you would think that sequence breaking incentivizes you to think on a macro scale during a playthrough, like it's if you want to be sequence breaking, sure, but like there's like a way of playing. All right, so like let me regain my train of thought, right? Optional stuff, upgrades, things like that. Why do we play these games? Like,
sequence breaking means you can only break a sequence if you are aware of a sequence.
Yeah.
You are not playing the game from Samus's perspective. Again, you're playing it as a video game, which is fine. The whole speedrunning aspect of Metroid is really cool. But it's not what I play the series for.
Yeah.
I want to be immersed in Samus's adventure, and she doesn't see it as an exercise in speedrunning and sequence breaking. She's not landing on a planet and being like, yeah, I know I need to beat the evil Chozo guy, but that's beside the point. What I really want is to get Beam X before Morphball Upgrade Y. That's why I'm here.
Yeah. Right, and you're here to break the game, essentially.
Look at Hollow Knight again.
I was gonna
say...
Hollow
Knight basically has no sequence breaking, because Hollow Knight has no sequence. It's just open.
Yeah. And I'm gonna mention something. I've heard this author talk about the author of this video talk about optional content, and he thought it was strange that we talk about, you know, not necessarily counting optional pickups as worthy of exploration, right? We're not really motivated to get that to the extent that he would expect if we were like intrinsically motivated to explore. And then he starts saying, well, they talk a lot about Hollow Knight and how almost damn near everything in that game is optional, and they talk about it in a positive light. So like he's like, what's the deal there? And I can make it very simple. The optional content in Hollow Knight has meaningful stuff going on. You meet new characters, you go on new quest lines. There's like stuff to discover about the world. What I see with expansions is like the only thing incentivizing you to get those expansions, if you're not, you know, struggling against a boss, is simply just the act of sniffing them out itself, which
Well, in Hollow Knight, even the true final boss is optional. It's a secret. That's more satisfying than finding the last of 25 missile containers, for example.
Yes. And I suppose what we're saying about that is, I guess I have to say, maybe we're not the ones that are intrinsically satisfied by exploration itself. If we're looking at the actual fruits of our labor and saying the expansions aren't as worth it as Hollow Knight's content, maybe we are the ones that are extrinsically motivated to explore because we're looking to be rewarded for our efforts with something more meaningful than just an upgrade.
Metroid isn't a collectathon. It's not like Banjo-Kazooie, where you're collecting jiggies and note pieces and whatnot. It's different. You are exploring an environment. And you also have to consider that in Hollow Knight, for example, the optional content is the majority of content. It's a completely different game design.
Yeah.
And it incentivizes both thorough exploration and efficient path forging and route finding.
Yeah.
You don't have to utilize Hollow Knight's openness to find everything. You can utilize it to find as little as possible and get to the final boss as fast as possible.
Yeah.
If you want to play like that.
Yeah.
And to be quite honest, mentally, I have always ignored missile containers and energy tanks when it comes to the discussion of non-linearity. Because, of course, these kind of options are non-linear. That's the whole point. They are completely optional.
Yes.
Yes, they are side goodies. In that regard, Other M is as non-linear as Dread, as Prime, as Super Metroid, as Hollow Knight.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's not like it's unique.
But you gotta look at the larger picture. What is the campaign you are playing? What is your goal? What are you playing towards? And if you're looking
Let me say this.
A game in that light,
if we're talking about optional collectible content, damn near every collectathon, other genres, Skyrim, other shit, has all of that. What is it then that we're looking for when we look for the genre of Metroidvania? What makes it different than a collectathon? It's that non-optional route, which will require a lot more thought of the player than your typical game. Right? It's the required mental capacity for navigation and memory.
Yes.
That is what separates the genre from a collectathon genre or anything else, or story-driven action games.
It's a getting lost and refinding your way forward simulator. And in Dread, you can barely get lost, and you will always be pushed forward towards the right direction. Yeah. And that isn't very engaging mentally. It's too simple. You're not doing all that much.
Yeah. I think if I wanted the same experience that I get from 100%ing any Metroid game, I could 100% Banjo-Kazooie. I could 100% Mario. I could 100% Lego games if I wanted to. Because those are all basically collectathons. Yeah, so we need to, when we're talking about non-linearity, in I guess in the context of Type 2 non-linearity, we need to focus on the main route. All right, so
let's
far more
going.
Sequence breaking than any Prime game, by the way.
Yes.
Yet you had no mention of this in your Prime segment.
True. I didn't mention but I wasn't talking about Dread during my Prime segment, so.
By his own definition, that is no wrong, because if we count those little goodies, then you can do all sort of sequence breaking in Prime. Because you can decide to get the charge beam combos at any time, or never get them, or do the artifact hunt at the end, do it throughout.
If he wants to play the semantics game, the I can redefine words to be favorable towards my position game, then we can do the same. We can play that game too, right?
Yeah. And if you count exploits and glitches, then Prime has a lot of sequence breaking.
Yeah.
So.
And
how do we define that?
But I will acknowledge that Prime is worse than Dread when it comes to sequence breaking. Sure.
Yeah,
but I'm going to also say that Dread is worse than Super Metroid when it comes to sequence breaking.
Exactly. And that has always been one of the biggest flaws of Prime, that it didn't dare to be quite as open when it comes to the item progression order as Super Metroid did years before it.
Yeah. I think if you want to give them an excuse, if you want to throw them a bone, it was the first 3D Metroid. It was like new shit on brand new hardware, like that they were, I think, just figuring out. I don't know.
True, but
I could try to make some kind of like bullshit excuses, right? But
Echoes and corruption also didn't fix the issue.
Like, yeah.
I'm kind of hoping that's one of my biggest hopes for Prime 4. I'm hoping it's basically a Prime game, your first-person Metroid Prime game, as expected.
Yeah.
But the item progression order isn't as strict. That's what I'm wanting the most out of Prime 4.
If Prime, if we're past the point of Prime 4 being as good as Prime 1 at least, we can take it a step further and say, sequence breaking, please, you know?
Yeah. Or maybe have
I don't have anything against
a very loose sequence.
Right? I think it's a good concept that is welcome inside of Metroid. I just don't think it's core to the values of the genre to the extent that it's made out to be with this Dread discussion.
It's certainly not enough to counterbalance every other design aspect of the game, pushing you towards a more directed and linear playstyle. It's not powerful enough to do that.
Yeah.
In isolation, the sequence breaking in Dread is correct. That's how you should handle this aspect of Metroid design.
Mm-hmm.
But other aspects of Metroid design are mishandled by Dread. There's also a couple of successes in Dread, but many of the core aspects aren't as great as they should be in Metroid 5 on your home console.
Yeah. And I think I don't know how to make that any more clear than what we've been discussing. Like Type 2 linearity is what we're arguing for. And I suppose if anyone's listening and they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's in my long form video. I also talked about it in the first episode of this series.
Taurus, the fire zone, which aside from having a few lava redirection puzzles, it's pretty much your stock standard fire area. Nothing special. No story behind it. Same thing goes for Dayron, what I think is a laboratory area. Sure, there are 2 times when you turn the lights on, but other than that, there's really nothing remarkable about this place. It's kind of a throwaway area since the player spends almost no time here. You've got Gavaran, your basic plant area, which has leaf platforms, and there's just not a lot of dynamics to the game's area designs. I love how, in Prime, everything has a story to tell. In Dread, you're exploring a brand new world with all this detail, a world inhabited by the Chozo, no less. For all intents and purposes, this should be a goldmine of new lore and creative world building. But it turns out to be a series of generic game levels.
In the segment about the environments, Tim calls a few levels forgettable and uninteresting. He doesn't go into any real detail about why.
I suppose now I can.
Maybe let him talk first. He's probably preparing a counterpoint.
Let's
see what he got to say.
Yeah.
But I can say that I strongly disagree. The incredible amount of detail in ZDR completely blows even Super out of the water in terms of environmental storytelling and cool things to see with the labs, temples, and many structures throughout. Super Metroid is 16-bit, so it's obviously not a very fair comparison, but Dread's environments have laboratories and structures in spades that all tell unique stories about what the Mach-In did on the planet.
And okay, so I think...
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna agree partially with him. Yes, I do think Dread has some nice environmental storytelling. You just tend to easily miss it because the game is on such a breakneck pace, you know?
There's that, and there's also the fact that like what you're looking at is literally just
background, basically.
Background. It's decoration.
However,
you can try to draw inferences
also have
from that, and that's cool. You could do that with a lot of other games. What I'm missing from this is anything more.
Well, the thing is, he's saying the environmental storytelling in Dread is superior to that of Super Metroid. And I think I agree with him.
I may agree.
But Super Metroid isn't the gold standard for environmental storytelling in Metroid.
It's not.
That would be the Prime trilogy.
The Prime games, exactly.
And the comparison between Dread and Super Metroid wasn't fair, as he said himself, because Super Metroid is so old.
Mm-hmm.
But Prime is 20 years old and still does it better than Dread.
Much better.
Echoes and Corruption are on much weaker hardware than the Switch.
Yeah.
And they still do it better. So, there's certainly an issue with Dread, which is unfortunate.
There's a limit to how much you can learn from just looking at the decorations in the background, right? Like, in Kataris, what are you going to get about the Mawkin besides the fact that they used lava for power?
Well, it also never has a conclusion. There's no punchline to the environmental storytelling. In Metroid Prime, for example, you're being told about all these crazy, sickening experiments the pirates are doing with Phazon and what kind of dangerous creatures and bioweapons they are constructing.
Yeah.
You get to fight those things. That's the main conflict.
Mm.
In Dread, you see all these shows of facilities building a huge army of power suit soldiers having jets and harbors and space harbors and all that stuff. You never see a living Shozo outside of Ravenbeak.
Yeah.
You have the environmental storytelling surrounding the Emmys, and you never get any infos about the Emmys all that much.
It doesn't tell you much. Like, I liked the environmental storytelling at the very beginning of Samus Returns, where you can see the research team just dead on the floor, just wasted, and that tells a story.
They didn't even come very far. Yes.
Yeah,
they're
they
just
didn't get
a couple
very far.
rooms in.
Stuff like that, where it's like you can draw a conclusion, like a small story happened here, you know, some event took place, but with the environments in Dread, it's like you can maybe deduce like something happened here, like okay, so there's these robot arms in the background of the science lab. Maybe they were building stuff with that. You know, the different machines that you fight or something like that. But like there's nothing else going on with Prime. Like Prime 3 had this down to a fucking science. You're getting like events that took place, like significant events, which draw you into more so the events of what was going down in the planet. And this is something we'll get into a lot more. This is a major driver for why I advocated for the scan visor, because like there's so much that feels like is missing here because they have the setup, but they just don't have the follow through that Prime had.
There's one example for what I consider pretty good environmental storytelling in Dread.
The big boss character?
He is related to that, yes.
Okay,
the experiment.
Okay, sorry.
The X are within a quarantine zone, you know? This huge, like, it's a huge metal ball, basically, which they are trapped in.
Okay.
And that's cool storytelling. It looks very impressive when you get there. You're immediately kind of like, what is this thing? Then you open the gates and there's complete chaos behind that. and you realize, oh, something was trapped here, was isolated.
Okay.
And then you walk back out and you see all the eggs flying out and you're like, oh shit,
Yeah.
I broke the isolation, this is gonna spread over. And that's exactly what happens through gameplay, because the enemies start acting differently now that they are infected.
Yeah.
And then the experiment takes over the giant lava pump to mess with the geoforming the Shozo were doing.
Yeah.
All of that stuff I think is very cool. But that's about it.
Yeah.
That's
you
the
might
narrative
make
highlight for
an
me in
inference or
Dread.
two from the statues in that one area, the flags, whatever. But I mean, what are you going to infer from that other than that they were like a warmongering nation that was like seeking that were just kind of like prideful, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't
It's
even know what
similar
they
to like
want.
dictatorships making big statues of their dictator, right?
With the pirates, we knew they wanted complete domination of the galaxy. But these Shozo had all this tech and all this might, and we never heard about them attacking anyone.
They've never done anything. You're right. It's never even been a thing.
Even the Toha, which were killed by the Morkin, were only killed after the Morkin had the suspicion that the Toha may be a problem.
The Morkin just don't fit into this universe, period. Because if they did exist, and they did desire domination like this, we would have seen their actions before this point. We would have heard of them.
Why didn't
they would have been very much known. They would have been a very well-known force in this universe.
Why didn't they overtake the Toha? Why didn't they rule over the peaceful Shozo? They had no issues killing them when they became a problem. So
right. Why were the Talon 4 Shozo allowed to live then? Yeah.
Yes. Why weren't the Morking the ruling class of all Shozo? They certainly seem to have the capability to do that.
I wish I would have realized this when I was making my video. This is a very strong point here.
The whole dogma of Ravenbeak and his followers is power is everything.
Yeah.
But we've never seen or felt them trying to take that power. Only through the exposition we know they wanted the Metroids because they are powerful. And then they got infected by X and that fucked up their plans. But what happened before that?
Maybe they were powerless up until the events of Samus Returns.
I can't believe that. Look at Planet ZDR. Look at the environmental storytelling we do.
Yeah, it's pretty unbelievable, but that would be the only thing you could try to do to make an excuse for this.
It's a whole planet full of Shozo military.
Yeah.
This force could have...
This has been in development for a long time, this planet, yeah.
They could have overtaken the Galactic Federation, they could have overtaken the pirates. I mean, just look at how crazy difficult of a boss Ravenbeak is and how powerful Ravenbeak is. He basically almost killed Samus with one hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Imagine this guy and all of the crazy...
On a base level,
Shozo.
he's just a super soldier on just his base level.
Yeah. And his followers aren't much weaker either. Imagine like 500 of these dudes stepping into a country. They're just gonna take it over in an hour.
Yeah. They could walk into the White House.
They could walk into the White House and be like, this is ours for the taking. And we never saw something like that.
They'd be like, come on, man, come on. Anyway. Yeah, I suppose...
Also, I'm being sorry for dying all the time.
It's okay, you can live. You can live. Environmental storytelling, though. There's not a whole lot going on here compared to the Prime games. There is more going on, I think, than Super Metroid, just because of the fidelity, right? But
yes.
I don't think Super Metroid had a lot of strong environmental storytelling. That might be a surprise thing to say. What do you get out of Super Metroid? You don't get temples. You don't get shrines. You don't get military, necessarily. what do you get? You get hints at man-made structures. You get the wrecked ship, which is cool. But other than that,
Yes.
like in the rest of the world, like what are you getting? You're not getting anything that looks lived in. You're getting metal craft everywhere that just kind of forms a maze-like structure, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna say the environmental storytelling of Super is pretty great for the times. But we have left those times long ago,
it wasn't,
decades ago.
When they were making Super, what did they have to work with? They had the NES Metroid. Super is a giant leap forward from NES Metroid.
Yes, and we can expect another leap. We had that with the Prime games.
And Prime
Dread,
was another giant leap forward, yeah.
Yes, and Dread isn't that big of a leap. It's
more of a step down from Prime in terms of...
It's profiting from the new tech.
Yeah.
But apart from that, design-wise, it's not as much as it could have been.
Yeah. And we're kind of like just the whole like environmental storytelling aspect. It's weaker than in Prime. But
yes,
anyway.
Agreed.
Anyway, I think even Zero Mission Zero Mission had the ruins at least. Zero Mission had no, never mind. That was about it.
It has a couple of things, with
Maybe
like
a few.
the crazy fly.
But Zero Mission was not a leap forward from Super in environmental storytelling. It was iterative. It wasn't like they were on some other level. Yeah.
Compared to Super Metroid's Mocktroid Lab in Meridia.
Right, and he's being generous here. I think it's generous to call it a laboratory. It's a series of pink metal pipes, like.
What in that area suggests that the place is a lab? It's just a bunch of the same pink pipes we've seen before with a few Mocktroids placed in.
Yeah.
Obviously Super still has fantastic environmental storytelling and
I think he's being overly generous here, actually. I like this environmental storytelling with the whatever space marine was sitting there dead in front of Kraid's lair. That was cool. You had
Weevil.
You had the is that the theory, the fan theory?
He just looks a bit like Weevil.
All
I'm saying. Not making up a theory. Don't buy into this. It's not Weevil.
He's not just
Just
dead
looks
brother.
like the guy.
Or Ian Malkovich, right?
Oh God.
What am I saying? How would that be Ian Malkovich? How would that make any sense at all? Anyway, I just think that's funny. No, the theory was that Silex was Ian Malkovich.
Oh yeah, I heard that. No, please don't.
I do like the part in Ridley's lair with the. I don't know if you would call that Chozo architecture or if that's space pirate carvings or something like that, but I think it's Chozo. There's a bit going on there, but again, it's like nothing compared to Prime. It's nothing.
I like all the dead space pirates and creatures sucked dry by the Super Metroid.
That's cool. I like that. That's cool.
But compare that to the Valhalla in Prime 3.
The Valhalla, Xeno research on Skytown, yeah. And anything in Prime 2 where there's just this room and there's just carcasses, just dead people.
The whole intro to Echoes.
So, where was I going with that? Oh,
well,
me saying Super
again.
Metroid is the perfection of the genre. It's the perfection of the genre, right? The core fundamentals of Metroid. And I had clarified this in the other one, but it'll come up again where, like, I'm quoted as saying that, and it's taken as if I'm saying nothing any other game does can ever be better than what Super Metroid does, you know.
Yeah, no,
in
that's not
any
what we mean by
capacity,
that.
you know. Yeah. So, just making that clear.
Environments in spades, but that 16-bit game cannot compete with the amount of detail afforded by modern hardware.
Since there's no scan visor, Dread can't offer any depth to its areas further than what's visually shown. It makes everything feel flat and lifeless. Yeah, you're looking at all the beautifully rendered aquariums, grass, and ruins, but it only offers as much depth as Animal Crossing's museum. The main draw of Prime's worlds isn't just the art, but it's the depth added by the scan logs, which give it focus and elevate it beyond its contemporaries and even modern games. What's the point of having such amazing art if you're not also going to flesh out the world with some discoverable history? Your game may look pretty, but it's so shallow. It winds up sharing the same playing field with most other modern games, rather than rising above them, which Metroid tends to do.
No scan visor in Dread is a problem. Wouldn't this complaint be shared with every Metroid game minus the Prime series?
Yeah.
Super Metroid doesn't have a scan visor. Why didn't you bring that up during that segment? Is that game flat and lifeless, as a result? Zero Mission came out after Prime 1, is that game's world boring because it lacks a scan visor? You are only now placing so much importance on the scan visor here because you want to criticize only Dread for this. You say your criticisms are consistent, but it feels to me like you are actively searching for ways to tear Dread down at all costs, regardless of whether or not it makes any sense to do so. Remember that previously when discussing Fusion, he said it was okay for him to criticize the game's color because the game still is what it is.
Regardless, this is what we get. The art style is what it is, so no matter how it came to be, I'm not going to stop talking about it, especially since it still affects immersion.
Yet when it comes to Zero Mission, he wants to give the game a pass because he thinks it may not have been possible. Tim places so much stock in the scan visor when criticizing Dread, calling the game flat and lifeless as a result of the lack of a scan visor, but also says Super Metroid is the peak of the series. How can both of these things be true? Remember that Super Metroid still is what it is, as Tim described why he can criticize Metroid Fusion's use of color. Remember that
I think I should just wait for this point to end.
Logic to justify his criticism was that being able to explain why something is designed a certain way, that doesn't make the design good. If I ask you to draw a picture with a broken pencil, and it doesn't come out very well, we know why. But that doesn't make the picture better. So in Metroid, we can explain why Super and Zero Mission do not have a scan visor, but that doesn't suddenly make the environments of those games more interesting. They still are what they are. If the scan visor is so important to the Metroid experience, how can Super Metroid do so well without it? And how does that same logic not apply to Dread? Obviously this mess of a logical inconsistency shows us that this video is nowhere near concerned with good faith or consistent analysis.
And he's drawing implications about the entire video based on it. But, okay. Let's start from the beginning. So...
Well, he's talking a
Hold
lot,
on.
but I really think...
Well,
I really
if
think
you allow
his
me.
Yeah, I'll let you talk. I just need one sentence.
Yes.
I'm gonna predict that despite his complaints being quite long, that you can dismantle them quite easily. And now I'll let you talk.
Okay. So, he will agree with me that it wouldn't be fair to expect Super Metroid developers to predict the future. Correct.
Yes.
That is not the point that's being made here. The point that's being made here, he brought up my Fusion section because he noticed that if something affects my subjective experience with a Metroid game, regardless of whether or not I can honestly hold that against the developers, I'm still going to mention it because it still affects me. So with something like Fusion, the colors still affected my experience of the game. I still had a lesser experience because I felt like the colors were too bright. There wasn't enough darkness to actually warrant like a fear factor or any sort of like edge to the game, right? So I talked about that in my Fusion section, despite saying that I do not hold it against Fusion, right? So
Yes.
so we have that pattern here. So he's noticing me talking about Dread this way, about the scan visor, saying, Dread really should have had a scan visor. It feels so flat and lifeless without it. And his major issue is, why didn't Tim feel like Super Metroid or Zero Mission is flat and lifeless despite not having a scan visor? This is a question about Tim's experience of these games, and why did he not feel this way? And his idea here is that I am inventing this out of nowhere just to shit on Dread. Here's, I think, and I gave my answer for this in the previous video, right? But here's the thing. I wasn't satisfied with my answer. I did not like the answer I gave. It did not illuminate anything about the game. It didn't really tell me anything. It just was kind of like the best thing I could say in the moment. I didn't have an explanation for why Super didn't feel flat and lifeless. But I think now I've thought about it some more, and I think I'm starting to come towards an answer. What Dread does is it does something different than what Super Metroid or Zero Mission does. It sets up these very explicit characters that it defines, and it does nothing with them particularly, right? It has this entire new Chozo culture that has been invented right then and there, and it's so contrary to what anyone would expect of the Chozo, yet they provide no backing to it. There's nothing to ease you into the idea that there could be an evil Chozo. It's just kind of expected that you'll just go with it. And I see that as poor writing, right? So, what is the easiest way you could rectify that? Well, by adding a scan visor and giving you environmental lore that you can find throughout the world. That has been the go-to solution for a problem like this, where your character is just way too flat, and just not fleshed out enough. I think with Super Metroid and Zero Mission, those games don't really have characters in the traditional sense. You know what I mean? They're not trying to set up this arc, this dynamic thing. It's like Samus is going there and her job is to eliminate the space pirates. And that's kind of the long and short of it. There's a bit of character building with Samus that, while not necessary, is welcome in Zero Mission, right? But in Dread, it feels like there was more that was necessary to actually sell me to the idea of these Chozo. And they're just... It just feels like a middle finger to the very concept of Chozo, just the fact that they just leave it at nothing. They're just yeah, we just have Ravenbig, he's evil, and just that's it. There's nothing to be said about that. That's just it. So I think that's what was driving me to really advocate for a scan visor in Dread particularly. And similar thing with Samus Returns. I did advocate for a scan visor in Samus Returns, just not as strongly. I didn't say Samus Returns felt flat and lifeless. At least from a story perspective, it doesn't feel flat and lifeless. The actual environments are boring as fuck, and I think most would agree with that. Maybe some people would agree with that. But I think to make those environments more interesting, you could add scans. That would be an option for you, right? With Dread, it felt like, yeah, just I needed more. I needed more from the story than what I got. Because that's kind of the biggest strength of the scan visor, is to give you so much information that is it works so well with the gameplay. It's not awkward at all, and you can just dump exposition into these scan logs, and people will, and it just feels natural. I don't know if you had anything to say after that little rant of mine, but it's something I've been thinking about.
First thing I have to say is that my prediction was wrong. You did not dismantle his position in 1 or 2 sentences.
Sorry to disappoint. I mean, that whole thing could be condensed into 1 or 2 sentences. I think Dread specifically.
I'm gonna do that now.
Well, yeah, you can do it.
Super Metroid told its story utilizing the entirety of technological features and design knowledge that was available at the time. Dread did not. When Dread was in production, we already had 3 mainline Metroid games utilizing a scan visor to a huge degree. And Dread must have been aware of that and must have made a decision to not include it. So if we feel the inclusion would... yes?
The line of argumentation you're using is more so a historical line of argumentation, whereas the actual critique was more on like our subjective experience of these games.
But our subjective experience of these games is not decoupled from the context.
That could be true.
You don't. Don't forget you're playing a.
I like having an argument that is decoupled from historical context, just because, like, if we're gonna treat it in a vacuum, there's got to be something in the game. Like, okay,
if you want such,
you don't want to play. You don't want to play.
What I'm gonna say.
You don't want to play.
What I'm gonna say is that
whatever. Okay, hold on. Yeah, I'll let you continue. I'll let you finish.
We can have such an argument. It would just be the following. Super Metroid would also have benefited from a scan visor, but we cannot hold the lack of such against it. In Dread's case, we can. That's the difference.
Okay. So, that's still... Alright. The feel of Super Metroid does not feel flat and lifeless, as I have said with Dread. That's where I'm going with this. And I believe
that's also the difference. You are more engaged.
Dread feels like it's setting you up for more engagement than Super Metroid was setting you up for. Super Metroid didn't really have any sort of like characters to speak of in the term of like things that are going to need fleshing out. Like right? With Dread, again, I've already made that explanation already. But with Dread, you have these characters that are woefully underwritten, where you need to flesh them out in some way, or they're just gonna be shitty. They're gonna continue to be shitty.
Super Metroid has a pretty simple premise. The space pirates got something which they're not supposed to have. It's dangerous. So you better go try and retrieve it.
That's kind of why I was...
there you go.
That's why I was complaining about the cutscene in... Right, yeah, Super Metroid is fairly simple. That's why I was complaining about the cutscene in Dread. That cutscene could have been used for literally anything other than just dumping exposition on you that has nothing to do with anything. Like, it'll maybe explain to you maybe why some X exists on ZDR, but yeah, the Quiet Robe scene. Like, you could have had character development there. You could have had, okay, I was fearful. I was scared. I was compassionate. I was, any of these adjectives. Ravenbeak, he had a tragic backstory. He's been done dirty by the universe, and so now he has his convictions about there being no hope left for any living being because they're all just cruel, or something that will add to the character and give them another layer of depth beyond the very superficial "I'm evil, muhahaha." And even Quiet Robe has even less going on than Ravenbeak. He's just like a guy that stands there. That's it. Like, you can assume he was involved maybe with creation of Metroids, but other than that, like, there's nothing else left to say about him. He just tells you what he knows and then gets fucking shot in the back. And it's kind of like they were aware of how useless he was, and they're like sending you the message that the only use they had for him was to give you that exposition dump. So yeah, the story is just insultingly thin, insultingly like poorly written. And what would have saved it was a scan visor. Like, I don't know if you saw in my Prime 3 section, I said the scan visor saves Prime 3 from just going to the bottom of the Metroid pile, you know? It gives you so much like player-directed discovery and just extra story that is so well written and just adds so much depth to everything that you're doing in the game. It's just kind of a no-brainer at this point to add a lore system to your game. Like, I'm not even hard stance on that it has to be a scan visor. Like, the actual method that you deliver the lore in is almost irrelevant. It can be done in better ways and worse ways, but like, just not having anything at all, just flat and lifeless. I'm gonna repeat that. So yeah, the simple explanation is Dread has setups that Super Metroid doesn't have, and it owes it to the audience to flesh those setups out, but it doesn't do so. That is why it needs a scan visor.
Yeah, although I'm gonna say that some parts of the storyline are so shitty you can't fix that by elaborating on them through a scan visor.
Like what? Like, give me an example.
Like Ravenbeak's contradictory characterization.
Yeah.
No matter what you put in a scan, it's not gonna explain why this insanely smart tactical genius, super powered soldier, more powerful than Samus Aran, for some reason is incapable of taking a DNA sample from Samus before doing his little experiment on her, so he could just escape in an emergency and have his Samus or Metroid cloning.
He should have had so many contingencies.
Yes.
And I want to even say, just even from a world building perspective, who are the Mawkin? What is their deal? Why are they considered evil? What is their goal? Like, these are things that are just like basic shit that we just don't get. Same with the Thoha, right? Like, I love that in Prime, you immediately get the Chozos, like, what the deal is with them and what their goals are, what their values are. You just don't get any of that here. The world building, the world building is basically non-existent. Like, you get okay, they had technology. Okay, they used lava for power. Okay, cool. Well, what's their society? What's their culture, you know? Anyway.
Yeah, we don't know much about that.
Like, there's only so much you can do with again, like I was saying with the Samus Returns section in my video, there's only so much you can do with minimalism. Anyway.
The games that Tim deems linear are judged entirely differently from the ones that he deems non-linear.
This is going on the assumption that I have no good reason to demand that Dread needs a scan visor. I will say, even in games which do flesh out their characters, I will still advocate for a scan visor. I just don't know if I'll be insulted that it doesn't have one quite as much. You know?
Yeah.
I'll advocate for a scan visor in Super Metroid. I'll advocate for a scan visor in Zero Mission. But, again, yeah. It's like those games kind of bring up their own issues and wrap them up in satisfying ways. So there's not an extra need for it.
And he also frequently just misrepresents those linear games in order to make them look bad.
Almost every word out of Adam is redundant information. He almost never says anything new.
Your words mean nothing.
But at least he's not bossy. They wrote him in such a way that it doesn't come across like he's taking charge, but as a result, he's left with no purpose other than to spout gameplay tips and little story blurbs. Thus, he could easily be replaced by scan logs on inanimate objects.
Oh, I do want to say, this is a point that I was making. So with that whole, with the scan visor point, that was something that was not in my original video. That when I was pressed on it, I didn't have an answer, so I had to go back and think about it. And so now I've done my thinking about it. That is really the best result that could have come of a video like this, right? It just gets you digging more for information. It points out something to you, an inconsistency in your logic that you should be dissatisfied with, to the point where you now have to go and rethink things. The goal is consistency, not only because you want to not look like an idiot, but also because consistency will bring the most insights into the design of the game and what the issues really are. I obviously had thought about it to an extent, but I didn't go this far yet. So like having these responses can be a very positive thing, to just kind of, lead to more illuminating discussion, right? Yeah.
His inclusion is entirely unnecessary.
Adam is far from unnecessary. Through Adam we get more of the game's story.
Dread's execution of player...
Oh, and that's all he said. Through Adam we
Okay.
get more of the game's story. We get like a few sentences. There is some description of each area, because Adam is like, well, the general purpose of this area is blank. But that kind of falls under the same umbrella as that environmental storytelling, where it's like, yeah, we see some like assembly robots. Yeah, we see some power generators or whatever. Yeah, we see some
You would have
statues.
You would have come to the same conclusion by just looking at the area.
Yeah. There's nothing deeper being said with that. Now, Adam does give you some things about Ravenbeak, some things about the Emmys, things like that. But those things aren't necessarily tied to Adam specifically. I mean, you could replace them with scan logs, as I was saying. And like the thing is, like, using characters for exposition alone is not a good use of characters.
No.
Characters in your stories should be doing character things. No?
I'm saying, no, it's not a good use to have characters for exposition only. That's one of the worst ways you could use a character.
Right, and that's what Adam is used for. That's what Fat Bird, as I call him, is used for. Yeah. Like, so when your character's entire existence can be replaced with a scan log, you know that there's something you need to do. Now, I mean, there are characters who exist in, like, okay, so like imagine you're in a sci-fi movie and there's some scientist that's giving you information on the new tech or something, and that's just exposition, and that scientist could be replaced with like something or other. That's like a minor character, right? But when you have like your major characters, and they just provide nothing to the experience other than information, it just kind of it just leaves you with nothing to sink your teeth into. There's nothing to grow fond of. There's nothing to grow attached to. The only reason people like Quiet Robe is because he's a Chozo, and probably because other depictions of Chozo have made people just inherently attracted to the idea that there's a Chozo. You know? There's nothing about him as a character that actually compels you. Same with
No,
Raven.
not really. Both of them are basically...
The only appeal that they hold is the fact that they're Chozo.
Exactly, they're basically a gimmick. They're basically like saying, the developers are basically like saying, isn't it exciting to see living members of a species that you all presume dead?
And that's the end of it. they
and that's not
dragged
really
that out
exciting.
For a full-ass game length.
That's not necessarily exciting in fiction, because you can write fiction however you want. You can revive anybody.
Yeah.
It would be exciting to see real dinosaurs.
It's like, yeah.
Because that would be unreal. But in a story, you can just say, these guys which were presumed dead are actually here. Enjoy.
It's like, the whole
it's
thing
not
I was
an
saying
achievement.
with bringing Uncle Ben back from the dead. It's like, what did you really achieve by doing that? You really just undermined the actual weight of the previous depiction. So, like,
Yes.
the Chozo being dead was kind of a really cool plot point. Them being extinct, the fact that you can't know everything about them. And at this point, I'm just kind of restating what's in my video. Like, that's a really cool concept of just the mysteriousness, the mystique, that you're never going to know everything about them. They're always going to have this air of mystery about them. Until Dread, just decided to say, nah, they're just normal. They're just here. There's nothing special about them.
That was the whole point of the Chozo. That is why
It almost
they
feels
are
like
in the game.
it almost feels like a move that Ryan Johnson would make, where he's just like, "Oh, this thing you've been anticipating, this thing you've respected, nah, it's nothing."
Yeah, true.
That's kind of Ryan Johnson's move. He likes to pretend he's smarter than everybody by just doing the most like unlikable thing possible. He's like, "Huh, I can make you mad,"
Yeah.
Huh, you gonna cry? Huh.
Hey, what you gonna do?
Their freedom
Write your own Star Wars movie?
Shit your pants, maybe.
is better than most of the past mainline games, but it falls short even compared to Prime 3.
Okay.
Prime 3 had
Here's where he's gonna dunk on me so hard. Get ready.
Okay.
almost no
Yeah.
arbitrary locks, and heaps of player-driven discovery in the form of scan logs. It also didn't force the player to report back to NPCs regularly. When there was something an NPC had to say, they would call you in hopes of getting your attention, and you were completely allowed to ignore them. In Dread, you must talk to Adam every time you enter a new nav room. Sure, you can skip the text, but you must initiate the dialogue. For these reasons, Prime 3, the most hand-holdy Prime game, still handles player freedom better than Dread.
No arbitrary locks in Prime 3? This is false. Dread offers far more freedom than Prime 3 through Dread sequence breaking. Prime 3, like all Prime games, demands you to collect all items in order. Prime 1 has some accidental sequence breaking, but only if you play the GameCube version and only if you go online and look up how to do it. Prime 3 spends its entire opening demanding you to go along an exact path, and the world design afterwards doesn't allow much more freedom beyond backtracking. You can backtrack, but there's always only one correct way ahead. The Prime games and especially Prime 3 are guilty of a lot of things that you criticize Fusion and especially Dread for. Dread has far more freedom than any Prime game. Dread sequence breaks include skipping the first Emmy, early Phantom Cloak, early bombs, early grapple beam, early speed booster, early super missiles, skip Drogi Ga, early cross bombs, early space jump, early gravity suit, early screw attack. So tell me again how this game is.
It becomes as linear as Fusion. As linear as Fusion. As linear as Fusion.
MLG horns, bam, 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 got him.
Or how Prime 3 handles player freedom better than Dread.
But yeah, anyway. So,
There's several fallacies here. First of all, he started to say that your comparison between corruption and Dread is unfair, and then after presenting the evidence, he asked how Dread would be more linear or as linear as Fusion. He's drawing the wrong conclusion from the evidence he's trying to present. He was comparing it to corruption, and then used that to say something about a totally different game. And the next fallacy is the majority of the sequence breaks in Dread he has named are also accidental and just glitches.
Really?
Well, yeah.
I haven't
Many
studied
of them are.
But here's
Well,
what I'll
I've
say.
seen a
Here's what I'll
couple-
say about what you said. The thing is, like, he's viewing linearity on a spectrum, right? Fusion is more linear than Prime 3, which is more linear than Dread in his estimation. So what he's saying is, he's like, Dread is more linear, or Dread is less linear than Prime 3. Tell me again why you think it's as linear as Fusion? So he's kind of like being like, dude, that's a major dunk on Tim right there. But essentially, what I'm going to say is, I don't think I can say that about Prime 3 if we're going to take sequence breaking into account. The only way that comparison of mine works is if you're not including sequence breaking as part of it. Because I just didn't factor in sequence breaking as a form of freedom here. Because I don't know. I guess just brain fart moment. But in terms of everything I mentioned, I still side with Prime 3 in every area that I mentioned. But I guess if you want to talk about overall, if sequence breaking is really that important to you, it's not. Yeah, you'll put Dread above Prime 3. So some of that dunk is well earned. Although, when I say as linear as Fusion, I am referring to Type 2 linearity backtracking. So there's that. Is there anything else that I was gonna say? What was your second point? Oh, just the fact that so all of those sequence breaks, the sequence breaks that he was listing off, I'm pretty sure most of them are contingent on the sequence breaks that come before them, right?
That too, yes.
So there's going to be
as I
a
said,
set of baseline sequence breaks that lead to all other sequence breaks.
And also, he called you being in bad faith, but now he's basically just applying double standards, since he didn't consider the sequence breaks in the Prime games to be worth of mention, because they are accidental or unintentional. But many of his examples for sequence breaks in Dread are also unintentional.
I also disagree with how he said that the games demand things of you. I suppose if you've been playing them enough to where you've memorized it, you can view it that way, to where the Prime games are so strongly commanding you to do things, but the games really are hands off. It's just that the puzzle only works if you use the pieces in the right order, So it's not. It's like you can say that's. It's as demanding as you would say that Dread's leading you by the nose is demanding. So, I don't know. You can say that's fair. You can say it's not fair. It's a bit of a nitpick with the language he used. But anyway, moving on.
The control scheme is once again optimized for going fast rather than taking your time to explore the world. Like I said with Zero Mission, when you design your game around being able to barrel past everything at lightning speed, everything suddenly loses significance. The little things cease to matter. You'll necessarily have to make your game wider, but it'll feel more shallow.
You think the game would be better with a slower running speed? You know that any player that wants to stop and smell the roses can simply stop holding the analog stick down? This is completely silly. Making the player faster does not make the world less interesting, and making the player slow does not make the world more interesting.
I think he's missing the core of what I'm actually saying here. He's putting the cart before the horse. He's saying he's assuming that all I'm saying is make the player faster or make the player slower. He's not actually thinking about. So we're talking about when you decide your player speed. That's a pretty early decision when you're making a game. I'm certain, because you have to design your world around the running speed that you've set for your player, right? And because of that, your world is going to be designed in different ways, and you're going to move through it in different ways. So I want to compare some games real quick. Think about, and they'll probably pop up on screen if I'm good at editing. Think about a game like Visage. It is a game where you are stepping at a snail's pace through a dark house, and it's a fairly small house, but the entire game takes place within this house, and it lasts a good 6 hours or something. And your entire goal is to just maintain your sanity, stay in the light, and just experience all of these little story beats, right? It's a horror game. And so they needed a slow walking speed in order to make the game feel real, like more significant. Every little thing in every little room has the proper significance that you would if you were living there. Contrast that against a game like Doom, where you're sprinting through each level at like breakneck speeds and just like punching the shit out of demons and then just moving on. Or if I want to get into an extreme example, Sonic Generations, where you are actually literally going so fast that you can't even see what your environment looks like. I would think there is a sort of significance per square meter or something like that you could contrast these games against each other, and kind of based on player speed, it will determine how the world is built, and it will determine how the significance of each individual prop, each individual environment feels. If you don't see what I'm saying by this, I don't know how I can convey it to you any other way.
Well, just compare it to the details added to the sides of a racetrack in a racing game.
Mm-hmm.
It all just swoops by. Still makes for a nice visual image, but you're not gonna pull much detail out of there. You're too occupied racing through the course and not crashing into the sides. Now, of course, you could say, well, why don't you just stop and turn your car around and take a look at the detail? But you're not playing the game as intended anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You are actively withholding from engaging with the gameplay as designed in order to take a look around. That is not the case with Metroid Prime. Even if you don't stop to stare around, just by walking through the scene, you will get a lot of visuals on screen which immerse you into your surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
With Dread, it's not really the case. Even if you have a couple of giant rooms right next to each other with lots of background information, you will most likely speedrun or flash shift through all of that, and you're encouraged to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best way to play the game. That's the most fun. That's when you get to experience this new dynamic Samus Aran.
Yeah, and the game is designed around you not spending much time stopping and looking at things, to the point where there were details they could have included if the player was slower that just would have made it into the game. Like,
that's basically how Prime was designed.
Yeah.
Despite the world being pretty big, it's segmented into tiny little chunks. Every single room itself isn't all that huge, but it's filled with so much detail. Even if you just go through a simple corridor, you usually have so much detail surrounding you already. And you just walk through there, you just take your stride, and you get to see all the detail and maybe scan it if you want to. You don't have to. Not all environmental storytelling in Prime is dependent on the scan visor, by the way. I wanted to say that earlier and kind of forgotten to.
And I think also the higher movement speed also means you probably want to pan your camera back to allow the player to see what's in front of them. Which means
exactly.
Which means the camera's going to be panned back, which means you're going to get even less detail. Now this isn't
That's
this complaint is not as simple as just change the player's speed. Just change the camera angle. No, we're saying the game from the ground up was built around this movement speed, and if it were built around a slower movement speed, you would see a completely different game.
exactly, yeah. Like your analogy for the horror game. You're less inclined to be scared when you have a very swift character, because then your first instinct is gonna be, let's just run.
Yeah.
Something as simple as that can alter the experience greatly. And in Dread, your gameplay experience is usually, gotta go fast. I got this very quick and actionable Samus Aran to play around with this new exciting control
It takes a lot of
scheme.
the dread out of Dread, doesn't it?
It takes the dread out of Dread, yes. But it also takes the engagement with the environments out of Dread, because oftentimes you're moving so quick, the only information you actively, let's say, compute in your head are just the black corners of the outline of the environment.
The contour.
Yes, because those are the edges you want to latch onto. Those are the platforms you jump around on. And everything else is a secondary consideration at best.
And this is kind of...
In Prime,
when
there's a huge, let's say, a tree in your way, a beautiful rendered tree, that tree, of course, has its collision. You gotta walk around that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just decoration, it's part of the geometry.
Yes. And I guess that might be part of why I complain so hard about Samus Returns. It's like the backgrounds have so much detail, but you're not looking at the backgrounds. You're looking at the contours of the platforms. Anyway, that was just a side little comment. Anyway, so that's our point of view on the player speed.
In Prime,
that's why I say higher player speed means less significance.
The boost ball to make many rooms fly by much faster.
Yeah.
When I want to, I stop moving to look around and take in the details. Again, it really feels like this whole Dread segment has the goal of shitting on the game by any means necessary.
But it's a big... Just put that Supreme jacket on me by any means necessary. Stretch to call the item collection order non-linear. There's a huge difference between Dread's sequence breaking and Super Metroid's sequence breaking. In Super Metroid, you can discover sequence breaks by accident if you know how to wall jump. Yeah. That one move affords so much freedom that the game is basically a sandbox. Add to that infinite bomb jumps and shine sparks, and you're unstoppable. Similar story with Zero Mission. If you're patient enough, you can skip a shit ton of items, and the game doesn't hide that from you. Sure, there are secret passages which allow you to skip parts provided you know about them, but in addition to that, you can just bomb jump and wall jump your way almost anywhere with any loadout. In Dread, the game limits your moveset so you can't experiment with too many game-breaking techniques, like single wall scaling and early infinite bomb jumps. Therefore, the only sequence breaks that exist are hidden passages you need to research beforehand. There are extremely convoluted and backwards routes to circumvent item order, but because the game puts you on such a directed path, you won't find those routes unless you're actively picking apart the whole game, looking for glitchy, frame-perfect techniques. Far from being accessible to anyone and discoverable by accident, the game's sequence breaks require the player to become a Dread scholar. The sequence breaks are so far out of the way that anyone who hasn't dissected every tile in the game is guaranteed to miss them. Realistically, only speedrunners and others obsessed with the game will find them. It doesn't embrace sequence breaking as part of the general experience, it begrudgingly includes it as a reward only for the most dedicated players. I think he skipped a section in my paragraph. Should I look it up to see if he skipped anything important? Let's take a look-see.
Let's see. Let's see what he's hiding.
Let's go back. Obsessed with the game will find them. It doesn't... Obsessed with the game will find them. here's what I say that he didn't include. I say, it's odd too, since a good number of the breaks aren't even speedrun viable. The path which involves getting early bombs is legitimately slower than the default path. That means that the only people who will get any value from that break are diehard fans that get a kick out of it. So then, whereas Super Metroid's sequence breaks are core to the experience, giving the world a sense of freedom, Dreads are more like Easter eggs tucked away deep within the game. This is something that he chose to exclude from the quote. I don't know why, but he chose to take that part of it out. Doesn't embrace sequence breaking as part of the general experience, it begrudgingly includes it as a reward only for the most dedicated players.
Sequence breaking being difficult is what makes it a broken sequence.
Sequence breaking being difficult is what makes it a broken sequence. I get what he's trying to say here. The thing is, like, it being difficult is, like, what kind of difficulty are we talking here is I guess what my major complaint is.
I don't get what he's talking about. Why would sequence breaking need to be difficult to do in order to be considered sequence breaking?
Well, let's not say difficult. Let's say less likely, less strong than the main path would have been. Like, you know what I mean? The incentive to do the sequence break, like, in order to define it as a sequence break, there needs to be a sequence, right? And so
True.
to break the sequence, you need to do something that is not as intuitive as the sequence.
Okay.
So he takes that to mean difficulty. So let's let him finish.
If it were too easy, it'd simply be an alternate sequence.
Yeah.
There's nothing glitchy or frame perfect about most of the sequence breaks. Additionally, Super and Dread both have fantastic glitchy sequence breaks. Just because you don't like them doesn't mean others won't. Sequence breaking in Dread is perfectly viable to discover on your own, and does not require a speedrunner level of knowledge.
It does require a 100%er level of knowledge, though, because you are going to need to know which hidden pathways are available to you at any given time.
Hold on a second. First of all, he's now calling the glitchy sequence breaks very fun. But regarding Prime, he wasn't even willing to count them. So how am I supposed to understand this?
That's a good point. That is an odd point.
And the second thing, he's saying, if it's too easy to break the sequence, then it is not a sequence break, it's just an alternate sequence. Yes, maybe it's what I want. Maybe I want alternate sequences.
Maybe so.
Because I like my Metroid game open. Refer to Hollow Knight again, for example.
Refer to Super Metroid. So, the thing about Super Metroid is a lot of the sequence breaks don't take a whole lot of knowledge of the game's maps or the meta of the game to pull off. Same with Zero Mission. You can identify sequence breaks on your very second playthrough. I'm saying that one shaft with the dudes in it, the floating guys that you freeze. You can sequence break by just wall jumping up that shaft. It's going to be difficult. It's not going to be convenient. It's not going to be easy, but you can do it, and it will give you a sense of accomplishment for that. I feel like most people, after discovering wall jumps, are going to find that sequence break on their second playthrough and just be like, oh shit, I can do that. And there's several places like that. There's you can get to the Kraid's lair without the high jump. You can get to the X-ray without the grapple beam. It's just a matter of having good platforming skills, right? And so
yes, true.
So Super Metroid's sequence breaks aren't necessarily locked off to people who just haven't looked up a Wikipedia article or a guide to how to do them. It's more of a skill issue than anything. And the skills required aren't really all that strict. It's just like, okay, do you know how to wall jump? Okay, so like see if you can abuse wall jumping to the point where you can get to this platform. With Dread, a lot of it is, yeah, you're gonna need to know those secret passageways, but also a lot of it is like, especially with, I think it was early grapple or whatever, whichever one is you going through that stupid tunnel in Kataris.
Early mothball bombs, I believe, which
Something
may
like that.
include grapple. I'm not quite sure right now.
But the part where you slide and you have to jump out of your slide and wall jump onto the thing, that is actually frame perfect. Like, you will need to get that frame perfect, and you're punished for missing it because you fall into the lava. So already we're seeing a level of difficulty that is beyond like what Super Metroid offers. Now there are, sequence breaks that don't require that level of skill, but again, you're going to need knowledge instead of skill in that case. With Super Metroid, the wall jumps are your godsend in that game. In Zero Mission, it's more so the bombs. You can bomb jump very early in the game, and you can use that to get early Varia. You can skip the power grip. You can probably do some other things that I haven't thought of yet. But there's a lot of sequence breaks that I was just able to discover on my own in my first and second playthrough. And with Dread, I was actively searching for sequence breaks and just didn't find any. Until I looked it up, and I'm like, really? Okay. It's like sequence breaks are just so much more difficult than Super Metroids or Zero Missions.
You also have a section in Super Metroid which serves to teach you the wall jump.
Yes.
But I don't think there's a section in Dread which teaches you the little Diddy Kong jump.
No, there is. The roll jump off the ledge.
There's one little section in a room which is trying to provoke you to do it. But most people probably won't understand it. It will just damage boost through the lava.
Oh, really? Okay. What else am I gonna say? Like, is it a problem? Like, so if I have this view of the sequence breaks, and someone else thinks the sequence breaks are easy, does that just make me wrong? If it is legitimately just either a skill issue or just a knowledge issue, am I suddenly made wrong because, like, are the differences between Super Metroid sequence breaking and Dread sequence breaking not real? You know what I mean?
I think they are real. Like I said before, sometimes you don't break the sequence, you just choose to go a different sequence. And in Dread you can't really do that. In Dread you have to break the sequence. You have to wrangle control back from the game towards you to
with
take
Super Metroid,
control
it helps.
of your...
With Super Metroid it helps because there is no iron grip on the player, forcing them down a certain path if they mess up. Like, so if you want to do a sequence break in Super Metroid, you can do that nearly any time. But with Dread, there's points where you're just kind of locked into doing the story. So if you missed the sequence break opportunity, you're going to either have to wait a while, or like you might end up being forced to move down the path of the story to a point where the sequence break no longer becomes relevant. You know what I mean?
That is also true, yes.
Like with Super Metroid, you can just back up at any point. You're just like, at any point you can just be like, no, I'm done here. I want to go sequence break, and you can go back and do that. With Dread, there's so many points where you can't do that. So that adds another layer of complication to Dread sequence breaking that just isn't there with Super. So you kind of have to have a planned route in Dread before you even execute it. Because, like, yeah, my second playthrough, I had looked up a sequence break, and I was intending to do that sequence break, but it just didn't work out. Because I had progressed beyond the point where I would even need that. So it was too late,
Yes.
Unlike Prime, as you said with your segment about the Chozo artifacts, discovering these is intrinsically fun to do in and of itself, even if there isn't
and this is back with the assumption of me saying
I'll do anything in any game just because I like exploring, you know?
Yes, yes.
Time-saving advantage offered. It sounds like it's you who fails to embrace sequence breaking as part of the general experience, not the game.
Zing. No. Like, the general experience, like he's saying get good is basically the long and short of that. It's just get good. That's all.
Yeah, but you're not supposed to get good at navigation or choosing a sequence of paths in front of you. You're supposed to get good at the technicalities of Samus's moveset to even be allowed to have freedom in this game.
Like,
You basically
yeah.
have to earn your freedom by being good at the action.
And with Super Metroid, you didn't have to get good necessarily to execute some of these sequence breaks. You just had to have enough tenacity to just like keep doing it until it worked. You know,
Well,
it's an entirely
the
different kind of feel, right?
The decision was also more important than the execution. You wanted to go somewhere else, then you could usually do it.
Yeah.
You can backtrack if you want. You can find secret areas. You can do some stuff that doesn't necessarily have you do very complicated maneuvers.
Yeah.
And once more, I'm gonna say, Super Metroid is not the end of all means when it comes to Metroidvania design.
Yeah.
Just look at Hollow Knight.
Yeah. Dude,
there's like 100
what's funny?
options for you. There's like 100 possible sequences for you if you want to get good. And if you don't want to get good, there's still 50 optional sequences for you.
I sequence broke Hollow Knight on my first playthrough. Before hitting that point where the game opens up, you're in Green Path, right? And your Hornet is watching you from a ledge.
Yes.
And she goes back into her wherever she goes to. And you're able to, if you can do it, you are able to lure a flying enemy up to that point and then pogo off of it and then reach that ledge where otherwise you wouldn't be able to. So that was literally first playthrough I sequence broke Hollow Knight because I just recognized that opportunity there. And I like sequence breaks where it's literally just, okay, there's this part of your moveset that's kind of like, you know how it works, or maybe you discover how it works later on, and just like the implications of that end up hitting you, and you're like, oh, so this part right here, I could actually do something here. So Super Metroid was full of that shit. I think the closest that Dread comes to that is with the speed booster. You're gonna have maybe if you're able to stomach all that experimentation, you can essentially try to speed boost anywhere and everywhere and see what you can do. And so that's how people get the what was it, early gravity suit or whatever, where you hit the speed booster to get to the green teleporter. And that was like the closest I've seen Dread coming to Super Metroid's thing, but with that, it felt much more cryptic to me than just a simple wall jump up a shaft, you know? It's like, oh, you have to know that that there's enough room here to speed boost, and you have to get the speed boost charged up, and then you have to morph ball into the water, and then speed boost across the gap. For me, I've always felt like speed boost puzzles are not as intuitive as other things. So, it is what it is, I guess.
Additionally, I'd like to briefly take a look at a clip from Tim's addendum.
And yeah, some people moan about how hard they are, but the community rightfully tells them to get good, because that's the appeal in the first place. To accommodate these complainers would be to sabotage the whole point of the game. If you can understand that, you'll understand why I tell people to deal with it when they start moaning about getting lost in Metroid. That's kind of the whole point of the genre. It's that labyrinthian, puzzle-like nature that defined Metroid as we know it. Of course you're going to get lost at some point. The challenge is in using the knowledge of your arsenal and the landscape to find more ways forward. It tests the player's searching and navigational skills. It's a design structure that offers its own unique appeal.
So Tim says here that people who dislike exploration in the Metroid games need to get good because it's the whole point of the game. So obviously this begs the question, why doesn't Tim take his own advice about getting good and put the work in to find the sequence breaks? A lot of them aren't all that hard, they just ask you to do some out-of-the-box thinking and utilize your arsenal in creative ways. Once you realize you can do them, they're actually really easy, like getting early cross bombs or early scan pulse. And no, the sequence breaks don't have precise windows of availability, that's
They
just
do.
yet another misrepresentation of how it actually...
The ones I chose to try to attempt, they do. So
He's also mispresenting your point. You have clearly said that if you want to get good at Metroid, what you need to get good at is your
exploration.
ability to explore and navigate and pathfind.
Yeah.
And now he's saying you should live by your own advice by getting good at action and inputs and finding obscure, almost Easter egg-like sequence skips.
Yeah, that's
That's not the point. Compared to Breath of the Wild, in order to fully explore your environments in Breath of the Wild, you will need skills which are not part of your action set, let's call it.
Mhm.
You gotta have a feeling for spaces, for environments. You gotta have the ability to think in depth, like spatial depth. You gotta realize when there's a corner over there, there may be something behind that. There may be a path there.
Mhm.
In Dread, that isn't really the case, because your standard playthrough is just guided almost entirely anyway, and if you want a sequence break, then it's usually not because you see the opportunity
he's
for
acting
another
like
path.
he's acting like
What-
I never
what you
even made an
see-
attempt. Like I never even
What
tried.
you see is a dead end, and you try to overcome the dead end by Samus's quite impressive moveset. That's not really the same. That's more comparable to you trying to glitch out of the map in Metroid Prime, for example.
Yeah. Like, yeah, I could look up all the guides and do all that because I put in a genuine effort to find the sequence breaks in my first and second playthroughs, and I just didn't. It just didn't happen. I had to look up a guide to find any in my second playthrough, and even then I missed them. I missed a good amount of them. So, like, acting like I just didn't put in the work is disingenuous. Like, what else was said? I don't even remember what was said. Just like, as if sequence breaking is the whole point of Dread, right? That's kind of where he's going with this. Like me saying exploration being the point of Metroid, I can back that up with many Metroid games that have exploration as the number one thing.
The crux of his argument is as follows. Your complaints and criticisms regarding a lack of freedom in your typical Metroid Dread experience are not valid because if you are dissatisfied with that experience, you could try harder to break out of it. The game technically allows you to do that. But that's kind of backwards thinking. It's almost as if the sequel to Breath of the Wild was structured more like, let's say, Ocarina of Time. Much more linear.
Here's an easier way to say it. If you don't like these Mario levels, just find a warp pipe. Don't play them, you know?
No, that's not what he's saying.
These Mario levels aren't poorly designed. You just need to skip them using your warp pipe. You just need to find the exit, right?
No, No, that's not right what I'm trying to get at here. It's basically like, imagine if the next Breath of the Wild game was completely linear. Tears of the Kingdom was completely linear all of a sudden, right?
Okay.
But if you manage to find some crazy exploit, or maybe it's an Easter egg, maybe it's not an exploit, you find some crazy Easter egg which is hard to find, then you can sequence break. And then someone was arguing that that technically makes it as open as Breath of the Wild. Well, no, it doesn't. It's kind of like,
right.
Let's say, what other example could we take?
I want to assume that he's not gonna say that Dread is as open as Super Metroid. I'm gonna go in good faith and say he's not gonna say that. But
well, if he doesn't say it, then he's agreeing with us, because
right.
that's our whole problem with Dread.
I think his point is literally just me just kind of refusing to, like, he sees it as me refusing to engage with the sequence breaks and therefore, yeah, judging the game's freedom more harshly because of it. But I'm not gonna. You can't tell me I haven't tried to find the sequence breaks and all of that, and I've engaged with it more than I even wanted to, more than was warranted by how much I was enjoying it, and it just, the results weren't there. Conflating the whole, like, okay, so this game has as much freedom as Super Metroid just because of sequence breaking. That's it's the Breath of the Wild argument, and like you were saying,
Super Metroid also had sequence breaking and many other ideas which helped to have an open and explorative experience, and Dread just doesn't have that.
To say it has more freedom than Prime is also disingenuous, because Dread is very restrictive on Type 2 linearity.
It's basically fusion, mostly linear, but this time, if you're being really sneaky and really good, you may be able to break free and run around for a while.
Yeah.
That's
but
it.
You're still gonna end up back in sequence at some point, right? I mean, I guess with any game that's the case.
No, it's not. What sequence do you fall into with Breath of the Wild?
No, I'm saying with any sequence breaking game.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't have. Why do we even need sequences anymore?
We don't. Yeah, we could make games that just don't have them anymore. Yeah.
I'm not on an agreement here that we should make Metroid very much attached to a sequence and then just be happy that we can break the sequence with some crazy tricks. Give me a Metroid game that is truly open to such a degree where sequence breaking
maybe not open
isn't
world,
a thing anymore,
but opener than
Hollow Knight is an open world, and yet it is still open.
Yes, Hollow Knight is probably the best example you're gonna get.
Yeah, and I want my Metroid 5 to be more like Super Metroid and Hollow Knight, and less like
the major areas in Blasphemous are all completely non-linear. You can choose to go in any order you want. I'm just trying to say it's like not limited to just Hollow Knight. There are other Metroidvanias that are also doing that thing.
And most Metroidvanias are doing something like that, except for Metroid. That's the issue.
Yeah.
The grandfather of Metroidvania has returned, and it's falling behind the competition.
And he's an old man.
And it's not easily excused by some sequence breaking.
The sequence breaks don't have precise windows of availability. That's just yet another misrepresentation of how it actually is in the game. For example, just getting the speed booster alone unlocks a ton of different ways to go, and none of those paths become locked to the player for deciding to go to one over the others.
I'll just take your word for it.
This just shows that even still you fail to understand even half of the potential that Dread really has to offer. It's
kind of like someone who doesn't want to get good at Smash Bros or something, and they say like, well, I don't really like the mechanics. I don't really feel very comfortable. Like it's not very good. And then they'll just say, well, you haven't done wave dashing. You don't know the potential of this game, you know?
Well, he's unironically criticizing you for not realizing the potential of Dread as it is. Well, he completely fails to see the huge potential the Metroid series would have if Metroid Dread wasn't so restrictive.
That is ironic, isn't it? That is an ironic thing.
Yes.
The potential of playing through Dread versus the potential that Dread could have been as a game.
Metroid Dread could have been anything it ever wanted. There's like a 20-year time gap between Fusion and Dread. It's a complete restart.
And that kind of just twists the knife a little bit more, doesn't it? Just the fact that they shot for this kind of game.
It's so safe. It's so safe and comfortable in its position. It's almost kind of surprising it even has sequence breaking at all, because it kind of feels like it wants to be Fusion again.
Yeah, it does feel like it wants to be Fusion. And that's kind of, again, why I was so critical of Fusion.
Do show footage of you after you've done the Shine Spark in Gavarin to get to the green teleportal for early gravity suit.
Yes, I did end up doing that, yes.
Which apparently you had to research.
Yes,
well,
I did.
If you want to give up and resort to a guide, that's fine, but you're telling me that you gave up from exploring around and experimenting with your arse.
I gave up from having to 100% the game to find all of those hidden pathways. That is what I gave up from.
Well,
I'm not interested in 100%ing the entire map of Dread. I was playing through it in a casual playthrough, and I was not interested in 100%ing it ever.
He's also saying you should have experimented more with Samus's moveset, but I'm kind of like, we're getting such technicalities that it's not really a Metroid experience anymore.
It's like,
not immersed anymore. It's like trying to longward back jump in a Mario 64 game.
It's like saying, dig for gold. If you haven't found it yet, you haven't dug deep enough. It's like, no matter what you do, no matter what I do, if I didn't find the sequence break, I didn't try hard enough.
Yeah, the American dream fallacy. If it's your own fault if you're poor, you could have worked just a little harder.
Yeah, that kind of shit.
Personal, 2 things that you like to say Metroid is all about.
Right, and it's more semantic games that he's playing. He's trying to redefine exploration. It's like, well, you should have explored the sequence breaks,
Yes.
What about you saying get good to people who complain about getting lost in Metroid games?
It's a completely different realm of discussion, you see.
Yes.
When I played the game, I actively searched for sequence breaks.
I suppose, you're gonna say what you're gonna say. If you value sequence breaking that much, you're gonna find ways like this to defend it. I'm not gonna say I blame him for making these arguments, right?
He's the kind of guy who wants to poke around in a video game until he can find the seams and break it apart. Mm-hmm. But that is not an explorative design in the sense that you are given the explicit option to forge your own path.
I think
you have to force it.
I think it's worth noting here. He has mentioned before that he has played Prime, Super, Prime 2 to the point where it's numb. He has no more like feelings left for the game. He's like he plays it 10 times a year essentially. He knows all the speedrun strats. He knows how to like do all the things. So to him, I guess he's kind of like at the he's like imagine
he's
like someone
for content, and
imagine someone
fodder.
who is immortal, right? And they've lived
Yeah.
several lifetimes, and then they just find no meaning in anything at all anymore. The only thing they find meaning in is if something new is offered to them. And so that's kind of where he's at, where he's like, well, the only values that I can get out of a game now are just new content.
It ironically fits your earlier analogy very well. You called this kind of design fast food Metroidvania.
Yeah.
Well, the guy is so starved for food that he cannot value the great delicious steaks,
Well, here's
prime
what we're
steaks
saying.
he's been served in the past.
Well,
So
okay.
he now just eats up fast food Metroidvania because he cannot
it's new.
stand
It's new.
He cannot stand a perfectly grilled steak anymore because he had steak for the last 20 years every single day.
Yeah. I'm not even at that level where I've played Prime to death that much to where there's literally no value in it anymore. Like at that point I can't bring myself to destroy the experience of a game that much to where I'm like playing it 10 times a year. Finding new ways
also,
to play an old game, it'll do that to you, you know?
This also really isn't an argument in favor for Dread, because if he keeps playing Dread for 20 years every day, it's just gonna be as boring in 20 years. So,
well,
if he just turned around
well, that's why he holds sequence breaking as such a leg up for Dread over the Prime games, right?
Now that's fucking stupid. That's fucking stupid.
Because
the amount of sequence breaks are still not. They are not infinite.
Your choices.
The game is
your choices for any given playthrough. Imagine. Okay, so he's looking at each game as if you have memorized it, right? If you have memorized Dread, you still have options for how a playthrough is going to go. If you have memorized Super Metroid, or Zero Mission, you still have options for how a playthrough is going to go.
No, it doesn't matter anymore. If you've already experienced every single option to such a degree where it is meaningless to you, then the options become meaningless. It doesn't matter when there's like 20 different items on a McDonald's menu if I've eaten all of them hundreds of times and I'm sick of them. Just imagine Dread would have released first, and he was playing Dread for 20 years now, and he's just sick of it, and then Prime releases. Would he be praising Prime now? Like, would he be saying, yeah, now the item sequence order is kinda linear and strict, but I'm just glad to have something new because I played Dread until I couldn't stand it anymore.
I can't say I understand this person to that degree. I'm still kind of just based on context clues, just kind of like building an understanding of how what this person values in games. It's very interesting to see some of these arguments. But yeah, let's just continue.
Found so many that I had to play a second time to find even more.
So wait, so he's saying his first playthrough he found so many sequence breaks that he had to play it again just to find even more?
In Metroid games.
He's
when
bullshitting
I played
you.
the game, I actively searched for sequence breaks and
I actively searched and found nothing. Zero.
Also, his view on Metroid is very stilted because he's revealing to us right now that he has no interest in the actual contents of the game. He just wants to have fun seeing how he can break this product apart. If he wants to do that, that's fine, but then really his opinion doesn't really matter.
Well, in his
series.
eyes, the whole breaking the game apart is what they were giving you with the game, not the main campaign.
Yeah, but that's not the point of Metroid.
That's really
it's kind of
starting
like
to feel like he's saying that the actual main experience of Dread isn't the main campaign; it's the sequence breaking. You haven't even played Dread yet, basically.
Yes, that's stupid. It's almost as if you allow me to make yet another food analogy. You cooked a perfect steak and everybody loves it, and then he comes complaining, and he's like, when I threw the steak at the wall at home, it didn't stick to it. And then you're kind of like, so what? I didn't cook the steak for you to throw it at the wall. I cooked it so you could eat it. And then he's like, yeah, that's your position. But I just buy steaks to throw them at the wall. I just throw them in the garbage
You're saying, like,
I don't
the purpose
even eat
of this
them.
game is to experience that story, and he's kind of using it as just a sequence-breaking playground, basically.
Yeah. He's not using the product as intended, which is fine, because if he's a free human being and he can enjoy his legally purchased products
sequence
as
breaking
he
was
wants.
included as a thing. It's just not the main thing. Like, it's coming across like he's saying like the actual main experience of Dread is negligible. It's like not even a thing.
earlier he said that the environmental storytelling in Dread was apparently so great. And now he's revealing that on his very first playthrough, he was already trying to break the sequence and the game.
We're gonna pull this back. We're gonna say we're just trying to understand. At this point,
I'm saying I am completely incapable of understanding. I cannot believe that he actually felt very engaged and immersed in this world when all he was doing was trying to break it. When Prime 4 eventually releases, I'm not gonna spend my first playthrough trying to clip through a wall to see if I can break through a door that I'm not supposed to
sequence
go
breaks on the first
yet.
like if he was able to find several sequence breaks on the first playthrough, he might have ruined the story for himself at that point.
I'm not gonna be like, yeah, I really enjoyed the new storyline in Prime 4 as I was no clipping out of bounds and trying to bomb jump back into the map.
But I did do like I'm fine with like finding a sequence break and doing it on your first playthrough because you found it, you know? That's whatever. But I don't know.
But he's actively trying it so hard he had to do another playthrough because he wasn't satisfied with his first playthrough.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, let's listen.
And I found so many that I had to play a second time to find even more. I didn't know about them in advance, I didn't resort to a guide, I just searched, which is what the game wants you to do.
It's not what the game.
No,
it's
it doesn't
not
want
what the
you to
game
do.
wants you to do. It's in fact the opposite of what the game wants you to do.
It absolutely doesn't want you to. Yeah, it has so many cutscenes and Adam talks and pathways which are blocked behind you. It does want you to follow the path. That's what it primarily wants you to do.
Yes. It offers other things if you're gonna try to go and break things, but that's not what it intends for you to do. Otherwise,
it's kind of like It's kind of like
this
you've
isn't
been at the
this
party
isn't the
all...
end of Portal 1 where they intend for you to break out of the test chamber, you know?
No, it's kind of like when you're at a party, and after 3 hours somebody is like, "You haven't eaten anything yet. Why aren't you eating?" And you're like, kind of like, "Oh, I thought this wasn't the kind of party where you eat because I haven't seen any food." And then they're like, "Oh no, there's food. It's just in the basement, and we locked it behind the door." but the key is under the mat. You could have taken it any time.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Like it's not the intended method of play. It is a compatible method of play, but just not the intended one, like the main drive.
The very first thing you do in Dread, when you take control over your character, is to go right, because the door on the left is closed,
Mm-hmm.
and then you walk into a room with Adam, and Adam tells you the highest priority. Get back to your ship.
Yes.
I will raid you back in. Make sure to talk to me.
Yeah.
I will give you information. And from that moment on, you are being directed. It's even in the story. The whole story point is that Adam isn't who he appears to be. He secretly was Ravenbeak trying to lead you in deeper into his trap. That's the point and theme of the game.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
It's not about freedom. It's about you falling into a trap. It's not Breath of the Wild where you awaken from a shrine and reclaim your freedom. It's about Samus falling into a trap and being underpowered and disempowered and feeling dread. She's trapped. She's caught.
Well, sorta. You're still, it's still an action game. You're still overpowered as fuck. You can still blast through shit,
Well, that's the issue that Dread cannot even, conform to its own themes, apparently.
Right.
But you're supposed to be... to feel dread.
You're supposed to feel dread, and then Samus
assume.
just stands up next to Kraid like, "What up, bitch?"
Yes. Yeah, it's
jump.
so scary.
Dread has the same moveset availability as Super.
Dread does not have the same moveset availability as Super. You do not get to scale walls with your wall jumps, and that was one of the main sources of sequence breaking in Super Metroid.
Yeah.
You do not get bombs until way later in the game. If you're playing it normally.
No spider ball.
Yeah. But Super Metroid, you get bombs extremely early, and you can use that to your advantage extremely early.
Also has the slide jump, the flash shift, and speed boosting wall jumps, so it actually has more moves to play with than Super. So you're just factually wrong to say only provides hidden passages you must already know about, and wrong to say these sequence breaks get locked from being accessed based on where you go.
No, they like even when you like okay, the secret passages can require you to use those abilities, but that doesn't make them any less secret, right?
Yeah, and also, of course, a sequence break loses its value after a certain time. That's just to be expected. Once you get the space jump in Metroid Prime, there's no value in skipping the morph ball half pipe and just getting to the room in a different way. You now have the double jump. You can now just jump up there. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
That's just natural. A sequence break can only occur where the sequence is taking place.
And so we're talking about, yeah, I was able to miss several sequence breaks despite trying to get them, and I don't know why he's saying that. No, you're wrong. Your experience of the game just didn't happen, you know. Anyway, I don't want to get overly flustered about this. It's fine.
As linear as Fusion? Please. Sequence breaks aren't really for completionists.
Linear as Fusion? Yeah. Type 2.
They are for speedrunners and people who value the intrinsic reward offered by exploring to find them or pulling off cool tricks to get somewhere. Once you know how to wall jump in Super, 90% of the sequence breaks require that move, so you're not really exploring for the sequence breaks as much as you are.
This is a bizarre mode of thinking. So, once you know that wall jumps are a good way to sequence break, you're no longer exploring if you use wall jumps to sequence break a second time.
And even if you don't sequence break in Super Metroid and you just follow the most obvious path, that path is still far less telegraphed than in Dread and much more fun to find for yourself.
Well, yeah. Like, his rationale here is like, the exploration is you exploring your moveset rather than the actual environment.
Yeah.
Which is weird. It's a weird definition here that he's trying to give to exploration.
He should probably just play something like Super Mario Odyssey. That's a game about exploring Mario moveset.
There was so many cool like things you can do inside of Mario Odyssey with that moveset. I did 100% Mario Odyssey because I enjoyed it so much because of the base game experience. It actually motivated me to 100% it. And I got a lot of the quote unquote sequence breaks. I got a lot of the crazy platforming stuff where you'll find just like a pile of coins on top of the map. I found a good number of those. It's pretty fun.
You could theoretically just drop Mario from Odyssey into any map from any video game ever, and it would still be fun, because all you really need are just some interesting platform and angels you can jump off of.
The whole hat jump shit is amazing.
But that's not the point of Metroid. Yeah, but that's not the point of Metroid. It's about the environment.
Yeah, it's like Metroid's not just a pure platformer or a pure action game, whatever you want to say about exploring your moveset, you know.
Which is why people like Prime so much. Because
the games are about the environment.
Plays like a tank. You know? Yeah, just look at Metroid Prime. People laughed at the game. Maybe see it as the pinnacle of Metroid. And Samus is a tank in that game.
Yeah.
She turns like a tank and she can do a double jump, which is nothing in comparison to the space jump and screw attack and you still get your Metroid experience.
Yeah.
If he's playing the series for the finesse of movement mechanics, then I would advise him to play A Hat in Time.
But it is weird because he's like expecting me to have the same
drives as him in this regard. And he's like acting like I'm being a hypocrite by not sharing his drives.
Yeah, especially when the series never told us that this is what Metroid is about. Look at the original NES Metroid. What kind of crazy movement options do you get? Well,
Nothing.
None, basically. But the environment is pretty damn good for an NES title. That's the point.
Even going back to Samus Returns, you would say there's basically no value in Samus Returns because you can't sequence break or you can't do any crazy maneuvers. You can only basically just do the base moveset. I said base a lot.
Drop the bass.
Based. Anyway.
Off the same trick over and over. In this way, Dread actually offers more explorative gameplay than Super because the game asks you...
That is so bullshit. The Dread has sliding and 360 aiming, therefore it's more explorative than Super. Like, the logic here, just like, what?
Both to explore and to sometimes to do cool wall jumps, shine sparks, bomb jumps, slide jumps, and more. But aside from that, you say you don't care for sequence breaks as much as you do the ability to return to areas you've already been. Okay. That's just your opinion.
True, it's just your opinion, Tim.
So he's like, okay, so basically your opinion is different than my opinion, which means that my entire attempt at discrediting you for having a different opinion is a failure. But that's just your opinion.
Nothing to do with whether or not Mercury Steam understands Metroid.
It kind of does, though.
Yeah.
Because
yeah. Sure, you have an opinion, that is valid. He has a different opinion, that is valid. But if you want to take a look at the series and try to see what it is about, then it's not about opinions anymore.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not going to say that my opinion isn't filtered through my subjective experience, right? So here's what we're going to say. I have an idea about what I think the core of the series is, right? I believe this to be true, and I have believed this to be true, and I can present evidence for it. Based on that, I think that Mercury Steam does not understand the core of the series. Therefore, I will present my arguments, and that's the end of it. Like, it has to do with what Mercury Steam knows about Metroid. It's just that, you may agree or disagree.
Well, the thing really is that if we were to assume your opinion aligns with reality, then we're gonna quickly see that most Metroid games fall in line with your expectations. If we think his opinion is more aligned to reality, his opinion that Metroid is about exploring your moveset, then really the only Metroid game that fits that description is Dread. So how could you honestly argue that's the core of the series?
Or Super, I guess, if you want to say it. But like those Dread and Super are the ones with the most moveset to speak of. The other games, well, I mean, Zero Mission has some stuff going on, like just with how well you can move around. Fusion was pretty stiff and restrictive. Prime games, they're slow and methodical. The original NES game,
Metroid 2.
Samus Returns even had
and
a very stiff moveset.
I'm not a crazy Super Metroid speedrunner. I can't pull off all of these tricks, but I can still play Super Metroid and have my explorative experience.
Yeah.
I'm not required to get good at mashing the wall jump button in order to have my Zebes adventure.
Yeah.
So even Super Metroid falls in line with our expectations. It just has additional
stuff on top.
Qualities.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Dread if you don't want to, or you are unable to engage with the additional craziness of Samus's moveset outside of combat, then you're not getting a very non-linear or free or explorative experience. Then what you're getting is another fusion, where you run from one Adam room to the other, while most of the map is sectioned off from you.
Yeah.
If he thinks...
Whoops.
If his opinion is that is to the core of Metroid, then he really only has Dread and Fusion and maybe Prime 3 to show for the offering. But our point on the series, our point of view on the series, that it's about exploration and immersion and all of that, engagement with your environment, basically fits the entire rest of the series. Even many of the spin-offs.
Mm-hmm. Some of the most regarded games in the series too, like
that's another
Prime
factor.
is higher regarded, Super is higher regarded than the other games.
NES Metroid 2, and Metroid 2 was often shit on for having the lava keep you from exploring freely before destroying the Metroids of one sector. So as early as Metroid 2, people were already complaining about, these artificial barriers in your progression.
Interesting
and
stuff,
exploration.
because we've progressed so far since that point, like to the point where the lava stuff I'm even just willing to accept, just because Metroid 2 is so much more explorative than even Fusion or Dread is.
True. But both Fusion and Metroid 2 got criticized for being so restrictive.
Yes.
People still accepted them because they are still good games,
Mm-hmm.
But they never caused any euphoria like NES Metroid, Super Metroid, or Prime
They
did.
weren't peak.
Just look at it
they
now.
weren't peak Metroid.
The Metroid Prime Remaster is, according to Metacritic, in the top 100 video games of all times. That is basically a retextured GameCube game.
Yeah.
And it completely takes everyone by storm.
I'm very pleasantly surprised at the reception of Prime Remaster.
Me too, it's very wholesome, and it kinda confirms the suspicion I already had, that Metroid Prime fans are silent because they don't engage in a larger Metroid or Nintendo community as much. They probably are busy playing different games because Nintendo doesn't have lots to offer what would, satisfy a Prime fan.
Yeah.
But now they're all coming back out of the bushes.
Maybe
like
so,
I didn't believe.
Yeah, there's
The same
Prime's
The
back
same
in
happened
town.
with the Prime 4 reaction.
Yeah.
The same happened with Prime 4
Yeah,
reactions.
yeah.
You had so many people hyped about it who you would usually not see as your typical Nintendo fan.
Yeah, it
So
made many waves, yeah.
People that are defending Dread and Other M and games such as these are usually very active and vocal in the community, and I get the feeling they are mostly attached to their need to defend the series based on the namesake alone.
Maybe so. Yeah, it's like a kind of rabid defense where you're like, someone hates something that I didn't hate. It's like that's unwarranted, and it's like anger. It's weird.
Yeah.
Because I don't have that reaction. Like, EFAP hated the fuck out of Scorn. They just despise it, right? And I'm sitting there watching it. I'm just like, okay, I liked it, All right.
Yeah, I agree. I don't even have an issue with people disliking Prime. Maybe you don't like first person. Maybe the game is too tanky for you.
Yeah.
Maybe you just want your Metroid to be swift. Maybe you want it to be more like Zero Mission.
Yeah.
That's completely fine.
Let's continue.
Nothing to do with whether or not Mercury Steam understands Metroid. The ability to backtrack to old areas is exactly what you're doing when you sequence break oftentimes anyways.
The ability to backtrack to earlier areas is what you're doing when you secret. Oh, that he's saying.
So
he's saying you want your backtracking sequence break then.
Yeah, so he's admitting you only get to backtrack if you try your best to break out of the directed way this game has to offer.
And that's
which is basically admitting
it's kind of
that
it is an admission. It's like
experience is not
the base game is boring and not worth playing, huh? Okay.
I wouldn't go as far. As
but you know what I mean.
Maybe,
you know what I mean.
Maybe, yeah, of course, but maybe we should just quickly tell to the audience that I'm actually a bit more positively towards Dread than you are usually.
Yeah, I feel like what's happened here. Your big feeling of being betrayed by Metroid was Other M, right?
Yeah, I've lived through the trauma already.
And for me,
and also,
I had only kind of seen the aftermath of that. I watched the videos on why it's so bad. I had played it myself, but I hadn't really felt that betrayal until Dread did that. And Dread's brought up as this big return of Metroid. This is the core Metroid experience brought back in full HD. Everyone's praising it. Everyone's like, yes, this is the Metroid we've always wanted. And it is so far from anything that I would have ever wanted.
Which they also said about Other M. Remember, Other M is the true vision of Metroid according to Sakamoto himself.
Yeah.
Which is complete bullshit. And I've seen the once very wholesome and connected Metroid community completely fall apart thanks to Other M.
Yeah. Man. So that's why I'm a bit more harsh on Dread than maybe Feix would be, and it's because of that I think that feeling of it just you're trying to tell me that this is what I've always wanted, and it's the furthest thing. Yeah.
Yes.
It's not the furthest thing, but it is pretty far.
Yes.
Other M would be the furthest thing.
Yeah, let's also clarify that really quickly, in case we've never mentioned it in the podcast. Other M is a total catastrophe. Dread is not. Dread is a serviceable action game for the most part.
It's gameplay wise it works, it functions. You can have fun with it if you're looking for action gameplay. I'm not looking for action gameplay with Metroid, but I will say the story is damn near reaching Other M's quality of story.
But not quite.
Not quite. But it's going there. It's going for it.
Good try. Good attempt. You get a star for trying to be as bad as Other M in story regards.
Yeah. So it's kind of, the game is kind of divisive. It's like I can't say Dread bad without some qualifications, you know?
No. You cannot.
But, yeah.
It's not a complete failure. It doesn't completely fall on its face while you stand there and shake your head.
I mean, I gave you 7 hours of qualifications, so there you go.
True, yes.
Anyway.
You talk about Metroid Dread's main event like that's all the game offers to you.
I mean, that's the main event, right?
Yeah.
So
that's what it offers from you willingly. You can still wrestle some more out of it if you really want to.
Exactly.
You say you like exploration but also complain when Dread asks you to do some exploration.
I'm face palming. I'm physically face palming at that. Dread actively discourages exploration, in fact.
Most of the time it does.
We've been over that. We've already gone through that. We don't need to keep re-hammering that point home.
You say a casual playthrough will lead you by the nose.
Yes.
Why are you approaching an exploration-focused challenge like a casual?
No, he doesn't understand what casual means. He's thinking.
So what he's trying to be all clever and use my words against me. He's like, well, you said you wanted, in my what do I call it?
He's thinking of the term casual like a 4chaner would be. Like, you're a dirty casual for playing Wii Sports with your mama,
he's saying.
Tim.
I'm explaining why he's saying that. So you know that section I was talking about with where I was talking about skilled play at the very end of my Dread video. Skilled play in rhythm games, skilled play in action games, skilled play in fighting games, RPGs. They all test different things in the player. And then I said I want skilled exploration to be a thing. I want games which challenge your exploration skills. And I was citing, Metroid and then Minecraft as another example. So what he's doing here is he's saying, well, since you don't want a sequence break in Dread, you're actually just turning down the exploration challenge that Dread is giving you.
Yeah, the issue is, however, it's not much of a challenge because there's no fail state. If you refuse to engage with the sequence breaking, you will make it fine through the game. It's
completely optional. That's the thing.
You will make it easier and quicker through the game than someone trying to sequence break.
If the game required that shit of me to begin with, all the stuff you can do and you can reap the rewards of sequence breaking. Oh, you can backtrack with sequence breaking. Oh, you can have all these cool platforming challenges with sequence breaking. If Dread was made to require that of me, that would be one thing. But now you're kind of going around with the same argument of the player is responsible for tailoring their own experience to make sure that they get enjoyment out of it. Like the path of least resistance, you are wrong for taking the path of least resistance when you're playing the game. The game has no responsibility to make you explore, but you have the responsibility to do so.
Compared to Prime again, imagine you were playing Metroid Dread and you had 0 skills at navigation, or you have no will to test your skills at navigation, whatever. Are you gonna get punished? No. You're just gonna be fine as you're being led through the entire adventure. You're just gonna miss out on the sequence breaks, but who cares? The game is laid out in front of you. Now compare it to Prime. Imagine you were playing Prime with 0 will or skill to navigate. You're gonna run around in circles for hours until you find a way forward by just sheer dumb luck.
Okay.
Prime is testing your navigational skills. You're never gonna be able to find the space jump after the boost ball if you do not understand that maybe you need to leave Fendrana now and go back to earlier places where you have seen halfway pipes. Yes. In Dread, you don't even have to test your navigational skills. Just walk forward. If you happen to walk into the wrong direction, the game will just loop you around. And if you're walking into the right direction, it will just close doors behind you till you find your way.
It's like the idea of, okay, so the sequence breaking is something Dread wants you to do. And I would say if that were the case, it would either be required or it would be heavily incentivized, right?
Yes.
It's not something that Dread just wants me to do. It's something that's possible, that you can do, but I don't choose to do it.
It's like an Easter egg for players who like to return to Dread often and who like to test the boundaries of themselves and the game. Yeah. But it's not the focus of the challenge and experience. Yeah. We all gotten good at Dread. It's quite a difficult game. You don't beat Ravenbeak without getting good.
Yeah.
But you don't need to get good at navigation or finding your way.
Or finding sequence breaks even. You don't have to get good at finding sequence breaks to play Dread.
You don't have to. Unless you're as blind as David Jaffe, you're gonna make it through just fine.
I want a game which tests your exploration abilities, whereby they require you to put these logical connections together. It is required. It is not optional. It is not this extra little thing added on to the end. It is a core part of the game that is required of you.
In Metroid Prime, curiosity is required to advance. In Dread, it's just required to... curiosity and a lot of patience is required in Dread to find some optional sequence breaks.
Here's the thing.
In
It's
Prime,
not required, but it can be rewarded if you're diligent enough. Thing is, if you're not that diligent, if you do some exploration and try to find some sequence breaks, but you end up finding any, you're not rewarded for that. You gotta stretch yourself to get anything, you know?
Yeah. Which is unfortunate because I
about-
remember in the pre-release to Dread, we were going over a website, just an advertisement website for Dread, and it was saying something like, this will be the ultimate blend of fusion and super. And I'm like, there's no way they're pulling that off, but if they do pull it off, Dread may be the best Metroid game in 2D.
You now know what they were meaning when they said that.
Yeah, it's unfortunately not as good as they promised. Which is an issue, because now we're leaning more towards fusion than super, which is not what I wanted.
Yeah. And it's why I felt so insulted by the game.
Why are you approaching an exploration-focused challenge like a casual? How about you get good and do some exploring?
Why are you
Take
such a
your own
filthy
advice.
casual, Tim? Why are you
Sorry.
such a filthy casual,
I
Tim?
don't 100% my Metroid games. Am I a sinner? Am I no longer worthy?
Just go
Whenever
back
a
to
boss
Angry
offers a
Birds.
parry opportunity. It only ever leads to a cutscene showing Samus doing some ridiculous maneuver while you mash the shoot button. It doesn't really offer any dynamic gameplay
Now
or
we're on combat. We're going to be talking about the combat.
challenge. It's just pure spectacle. What happened to the disdain people had for QuickTime events? Games like Beyond Two Souls and Detroit Become Human are infamous for this mechanic. Video games are an interactive medium, and it's frustrating to see that go to waste when developers would rather make an interactive cutscene than a dynamic gameplay system.
The dynamic gameplay are the new dodge and parry moves. In Super Metroid,
Yeah, those exist, but also the parry. The only thing the parry ever leads to is a cutscene. It's not like it opens up any new gameplay opportunities. Like with the Souls games, you have your dodge ability, which will open up new opportunities once you successfully dodge. And I think, are there parries in Soulsborne?
Yes, you can parry
Any of them?
Demon Souls, if I remember correctly. It's been a couple of years since I played that.
Does that open up more gameplay opportunities, or does it lead to a simple cutscene showing you doing like a kill maneuver?
Actually, you can do both. It stuns the enemy, and depending on what you do, you can do a lethal strike. And because that kills in one strike, it's somewhat comparable to a cutscene, but we're not talking about a flashy 30-second cutscene of your character jumping around. No, it's just you striking your blade through your enemy and then they fall down.
So it essentially would just be a finishing move at that point. But
Exactly.
yeah, with Dread, I guess the X-infected Chozo enemies might be the closest you'll get to just like a finishing move as the parry. But even that's just like, it's still like just a series of QuickTime events. But that's what I'm saying is like with Dread, like you would think the parry would maybe open up some other opportunity where it's like, okay, you parry them and then you do something else.
You can combo them.
Yeah, you can combo, you can do whatever. But in this game, it's just like you parry them and then you get like, yeah, a 30-second cutscene of you just dodging their attacks while you're shooting missiles, or you just jumping on its face while shooting missiles.
People actually complained a lot about that in Samus Returns. I'm not sure why the criticism didn't return with Dread. Maybe people were just a bit stunned by how flashy the graphics are. And I do believe it helps a little. If you are forced to watch a cutscene, it better look good, you know what I mean?
Okay.
But obviously it would be superior if you were actively still able to use all of your gear and equipment.
And make your
And
decisions. Yeah.
Yes. Just look at Doom Combat. That's a shooter, but all the different weapons have different effects, and you basically combo them into each other like in a fighting game.
That's cool.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
And I'm
For
gonna say right here, we have a problem with Dread focusing on action, since it wasn't able to do so without diminishing the explorative elements.
Yeah, exactly.
If, for some reason, these developers raised above every other developer and gave us a Metroid game which has awesome action, maybe even better than Dread, which is already pretty good at action.
Wait, what? Which developers?
And it doesn't matter which developers, any developer. If any developer gave us a Metroid game with a really sophisticated action system, and we still get all of the exploration we're craving, I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna kiss their hands and I'm gonna fall on my knees and say, thank you. Thank you for this amazing masterpiece.
Here's the point. Delivering on action is not necessary for me to be satisfied with a Metroidvania.
No, but if I get a Metroidvania that is satisfying me due to its exploration,
it's welcome.
And then
it's welcome,
it has this great action on top, that's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, it's a welcome thing, but it's not required. The thing that I require to be satisfied with a Metroidvania is that exploration gameplay, that backtracking, that test of your knowledge, that your logical abilities and your memory.
Look at Hollow Knight again.
That's why I focus on it, because that's the core. That's what we want.
Yeah. I don't play Hollow Knight primarily for the action, but the action is still good enough where it engages me.
Yeah.
I do play like the boss rush mode and the Colosseum of Fools and all of that stuff. But the major success of Hollow Knight is still the Metroidvania stuff.
Yeah.
It somehow managed to have both, which is awesome. If Mercury Steam manages to do that with their Dread 2 or whatever they are working on, if they are working on Metroid, I'm gonna be all there for them. Cool. I'm completely open for that. That would be very sweet. But we're not at that point.
If we can get that, I will say Mercury Steam finally understands Metroid.
Yes.
Anyway, let's continue.
Example, your only options to avoid damage from an attack are to jump, run, morph ball, or shoot your way out. That's fine and all, but introducing additional ways to answer to attacks from enemies and bosses is more dynamic, not less. These are not quick time events.
He's using the wrong context, because we're talking about the parry itself, not the entire moveset, right?
They are a reward for successfully landing a parry. They reward you with a unique spectacle and extra damage towards the enemy.
Well,
you are making a false equivalent.
We are not the kind of people who feel rewarded by looking at a spectacle cutscene, though. We are rewarded by a satisfying gameplay, which is why I think the parry works better on smaller enemies, because that's usually your satisfying finishing move. It turns the tide of the battle. In boss moves, it's an optional goodie you can use to get a phenomenal cutscene, but you're not really playing the game at that time anymore.
Exactly, yeah.
And
I think you hit it on the head. That's like our rewarding, the part we feel rewarded by is our own actions leading to those outcomes, not just some animation of Samus being cool. We want to be cool.
And it's also notable...
We want to be cool as Samus. We don't want to just watch Samus being cool.
Yes. And it's also notable that many speedrunners actively miss the parries on bosses because during the cutscenes, your damage output is actually reduced.
Oh.
So let's say a missile only does 2/3 of damage it would usually do. Because otherwise, this whole cutscene would be completely overpowered.
I didn't know that. You're just wasting your time.
You're wasting time and ammunition, and as a speedrunner, you cannot.
Man, if I would have known that, I wouldn't. I wouldn't have engaged at all. Although with Ravenbeak, I'm pretty sure the parry is required to even advance to the next phase. It's literally like you have to do this just to tell the game that we need to go to the next phase.
I think so, yeah. But with every other boss, speedrunners basically cannot afford to do the parry, because they're just gonna waste time and have their competition, rush ahead while they are busy watching a cutscene.
Of course, yeah.
By comparing them to Detroit Become Human or Beyond Two Souls.
Well, it's the principle of.
Yeah, the principle. Of course, Metroid Dread isn't as barren and cinematically driven as
he's
these
saying
games.
Like I said that Dread is those games. It's not what I said.
There's a big difference between Resident Evil 5 quick time events and Soulsborne riposte animations. To group Dread's parry with the former is a blatant misrepresentation of the source material.
No.
I beat Sans Undertale, Sigma, and most of Hollow Knight's bosses. Believe me when I tell you that Dread goes hard as fuck. The game expects excellence of the player here, and it gives no handouts. This is the one area where Dread doesn't cater to the least skilled players. These are tough as nails arcade-style bosses, which also means there's plenty of trial and error and pattern memorization. This presents a problem. You see, the more often you repeat a boss battle, the more you will necessarily diminish your immersion. When a boss is this difficult, you're required to treat the game not as a separate world, but as a hard-coded video game experience. You're quite literally reducing the boss's movement to a series of predictable patterns, which you then exploit. When you do that, it's impossible not to think of the boss as just a programmed game asset. Another problem with such hard bosses is that they take up an insane amount of playtime.
Metroid is a video game first and foremost. This segment fails to consider the Metroid games outside of your own perspective. Plenty of people have died many times on each boss in all Metroid games. Some people found Dread to be nothing terribly difficult. Dread.
I think whoever found Dread to be nothing terribly difficult are like crack addicts or something. Like, what?
Well, I'm gonna say if you're the kind of person who finds Dread to be not much of a challenge, you're also not the kind of person who would die to any other Metroid boss.
Yeah, very much so. But I guess the point I'm saying is Dread is more difficult than any other Metroid game, like, in the past, period. Just full stop. And that's what I'm saying. And here's what I'm saying is because of that, you're going to be grinding Dread a lot more if you're an average player. A lot more.
True.
Like, of course you're going to repeat bosses in any game. Like, you're going to die to a boss. Yeah, sure. But how much are you going to die to a boss? Like, are you going to have to literally grind it out, like, over the course of, like, an hour, 2 hours? Like, that's what you do with Dread.
It's not a surprise that both Samus Returns and Dread had checkpoints. I mean, Corruption had them too, but you barely even notice because Corruption is so easy you don't die in that game.
I never really needed that.
Corruption is pushing too much in the other direction.
But I will say, you know, I've played games like Hollow Knight and Blasphemous. Those have brutal bosses, right?
Yes.
And those take a lot of replays as well. So it's not like a universally just bad thing, but it's something to keep in mind, right? You're gonna lose some immersion the more you replay a boss and try to account for its patterns.
Yeah, Dread's difficult bosses are a compromise. They bring a lot to the table, but they also reduce some other qualities. And I'm personally not quite sure where I stand with that, because I'm not playing Metroid primarily for the difficulty of bosses, but
That's
I still had a
thing.
lot...
I never asked for this kind of difficulty.
Yes, but I still ended up having lots of fun with Dread's bosses, and now I'm kinda where I'm like, if we get another Mercury Steam game, I don't think I would want easy bosses from them. I think I would miss them, maybe?
I personally would prefer probably something in between the difficulty of Dread and the difficulty of something like Prime, where, you know, it's not a pushover, it's not gonna be, like, easy.
So you're saying you want Metroid Prime 2 Echoes?
I guess so, if I'm remembering it right. Yeah. Where, you know, you're not going to be pulling your hair out at it, but you're also not going to be pulling your hair in at it. But you're also not going to be, like, just mopping the floor with it.
Yeah.
So, and that kind of ties into... What was I going to say? Oh, this ties into Dread's handholding. Like, Dread will not hold back at all in its boss difficulty.
Yeah.
Versus its difficulty of finding your way, navigating, exploring. It babies you as much as it can without being too in your face with, like, waypoints and stuff.
Maybe because Dread believes a player who is stuck on a navigational challenge will get bored, while a player who is stuck on a combat challenge will be energized to try again. And I can kinda see where they are coming from. When you're just running circles and you have no clue where to go, not everybody is gonna find
like
that
me,
enticing.
Someone like me is energized towards that challenge.
Me too. Which is why I like Metroid so much, because it can give me that challenge, and I like Breath of the Wild and Hollow Knight.
Yeah. I recently played Axiom Verge, and we had some of that going on, where it's like, where do I go next? Well, let's try our options, and we just kept going, and it was fun. It just went as it went. So I will say I'm the kind of player that enjoys that kind of a challenge. Less so with thumb-breaking combat encounters, as I put it. If I play a game and there's just a difficulty spike for no reason, I'm just like frustrated. I get pissed off. I do beat it eventually, but I get considerably angry.
I would love to watch you play the next 2D Metroid
My
game.
first Dread playthrough, there's a full playthrough of it that I have edited and ready to go. I just didn't want to upload it because I felt like it would have been redundant. Maybe if enough people in the comments want to say that they want to see that, then I can put it up. But yeah, anyway.
Unlike Super Metroid, offers different difficulty options for players of different skill levels. If you really hated
Wait, Super Metroid offers different difficulty options for players at different
No.
levels?
Dread offers, unlike Super Metroid.
Oh, I think I was playing on normal.
Dying that much, play on easy. Drop whatever stigma the community at large says about playing games on easy difficulty.
Well, even if it's on easy, I'm guessing it's going to be harder than your average easy mode in any game.
Probably even harder than your average normal mode in other Metroid games.
But again, yeah. Other Metroid games, normal mode is far easier than this one. That there's something up with that. Like that's a difference. And it's a difference I noticed and that I'm not too fond of. If they wanted to like make the game about as hard as any of the other games on normal, and then the hard mode is when you actually start playing for real, then there's that. That would have been something.
And allow yourself to have the experience that suits
your... now he's just kind of saying, well, you're just bad.
Needs. There is shame in playing any game on easy mode.
He's saying you should choose.
And aside from that, I'd say Hollow Knight is far more.
And yeah, I guess I could have chose easy mode. I just didn't.
He's saying
when I chose normal, like, can you change your difficulty mid game? If so, then I guess he has a point. But if you can't,
he's saying you should choose the mode of play which suits you the best, but I didn't see any option in Dread which allows me to freely roam and explore the environment.
Oh yeah.
Challenging than Dread. You even used Hollow Knight as an example of challenging games you love in this video. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering how this criticism doesn't apply to Hollow Knight but somehow applies to Dread. I know this video isn't about Hollow Knight, but I know Hollow Knight is a game you like to frequently compare to Dread in order to try to make Dread look bad. You go on to claim that
it's such a simple way of looking at it.
That you feel like the developers wanted to prioritize action over exploration, but this is not at all supported. I'd be repeating myself to remind you.
Action over exploration is not a thing, he's saying.
Yeah, but he's also complaining about you comparing it to Hollow Knight, when really Hollow Knight shows how you can have equal parts action and exploration, or just have exploration be the main part of your experience.
Now,
which is also proven by older Metroid games.
Yeah, if you're not able to change the difficulty of your Dread playthrough in the middle of it, then he has no grounds on which to tell me that I have to change the difficulty.
You couldn't anticipate how hard this game is gonna get. It was a surprise for me.
I'm playing a Metroid game like any other, and I just choose normal because, of course, you know?
It's normal. That's what you pick.
I don't want it to be like I'm mopping the floor with everything. I do want some challenge, but I don't want to, bleed.
So yeah, and so he's kind of making like 3 or 4 different points. He's kind of just like rapid firing points at this point.
Of the many expansions and sequence breaks.
A major
Right, and that's like saying any collectathon is about exploration because you have your collectibles.
oversight in
Also,
Dread is the
allow
or
me
like-
to quickly remind you that we've been talking about over 3 hours now. So maybe we listen in on one more of his points and talk about it, and then we'll save some for the next episode.
Yes. What was I gonna say? Oh, like, okay, so like there's a lot of games with optional collectibles, like a lot of story based, like just I think Until Dawn had some optional collectibles. And that game is not about exploration. You can't say that it is. It's a movie, essentially.
True.
So optional collectibles does not equate to exploration all the time. So
the inability to change the controls. This game is about as complex as Smash,
here's a
so
control
you'd
scheme
expect
discussion.
some customization options to tailor the experience to different players. It's a no-brainer, but it's nowhere to be seen. Thankfully, the Switch comes with its own ability to remap controllers, but there are a few problems with this. For one, the game's button labels won't match your new controls. This makes the game needlessly confusing. For another, you can't remap most controllers. It only really works on first-party controllers, like Joy-Cons or the Pro Controller, and I ain't about to drop $70 on a basic gamepad, so I was stuck with Joy-Cons. Dread really just needs its own button mapping options, and it's baffling that this feature is absent.
This is true. The fact that we can't remap controls is annoying. But why not bring this up anywhere else? Because this one uses the most buttons. Prime uses all buttons, and has an okay amount of control options, but
no, but there is a better reason why I didn't bring it up elsewhere. It's because this game is so much fucking harder than all the other ones.
Yeah, and it's also a bit of a false equivalency to say Prime also uses all buttons, because the GameCube controller has considerably less buttons than a Switch gamepad.
True. Yeah, and there's a lot of buttons on the Prime Remaster that are just reused,
Yes.
So yeah, the idea here is like, I'm gonna bring up these controls because I even said it in the video itself. He just ignored that. Because the game is so hard, you need to be able to play it comfortably in order to like execute these maneuvers that are required of you properly. And so for me, I needed to switch the bumpers and triggers because I am not about to hold a bumper down to use missiles.
Yeah, I caught myself doing some very stupid mistakes in playing Metroid Prime Remaster, because even though I like all these new control options, after having played the original version for 20 years, I have so much muscle memory that I sometimes just input what I should have inputted on the GameCube version.
Yeah.
And that caused me to take some unnecessary damage. But I
fun.
never died because of that.
Yeah.
In Dread, I would have died. I wouldn't have made it
You're
through
always
its
hanging on
hardest
the
bosses.
edge of death in Dread, yeah.
but does not let you remap most buttons. You call
Also,
it a major
excuse me
oversight,
for
and no-
interrupting,
But
since then we had a DLC for Metroid Dread. There's a insta-kill mode now, where taking 1 HP of damage kills you. Game
that's
over.
fucked.
And you're not allowed to remap your controls as you want. That's suboptimal, to say the least.
Yeah, I call it a major oversight because like this game is so demanding on your fingers, like compared to any other Metroid game, compared to like any other Switch game, essentially.
Just to be clear, Metroid Prime Remastered would also have benefited from even more control options, despite already having powerful control options.
Sure, the only thing is, like, I don't find them necessary. Like, with GameCube and Prime and all of that, I don't need to remap my controls. The game is easy enough, and the controls work well enough that I don't need to. It's just like a matter of, it's that. That's all it is.
It's not that I hate Dread and I'm like looking for any little excuse to shit on it, you know? These are
Also,
genuine things that came up during my playthrough.
complaints about Metroid Dread's control scheme are actually quite common. I like the controls more than the average player, it seems. The average player I have often seen complain about many of Dread's control decisions. Like, if
The
you
dodge
wanna...
is A.
For example, but if you want to do a lot of stuff at the same time, maybe you want to jump and then turn your jump into a space jump while you are free aiming, and then you shoot a grapple beam at a surface to grapple towards it. You're basically clawing your hands all around the controller to get to all these buttons.
Yeah.
And I didn't mind too much, but many people were complaining, and I understand. I also think Metroid Dread could have had a dual stick control option as well. So you can free aim while running. That would have been cool, but we unfortunately don't get that, so yeah.
Yeah. Let me see the end of this point and see if we can be done.
Not let you remap most buttons. You call it a major oversight, and no-brainer, here, but don't think it's worth bringing up at all in any of your segments of the other games. It's not without its issues, but you actually show that Dread has more button mapping options than the Prime games.
Well, just because the Switch does. That's about it.
Yeah.
I mean, now that Prime is on the Switch, now Prime has the same amount of button mapping options as Dread.
And
but
you know
more,
which
actually.
game? You know which game has more button prompting action than Dread has?
Super
Metroid, right?
Yep.
Feels to me like you want to bring it up only here to further shit on Dread at all costs, regardless if it makes sense to do so.
The plastic. Anyway, okay. So this is the next point. We can save this for later, but yeah, it was amazing getting to look back at this video again. I feel like we've gotten a lot of good discussion out of this, actually. You got anything to say?
Well, it's been a lot of fun. It's hopefully gonna be a lot of fun soon again.
Yeah.
I hope those people who join in are also having a lot of fun. I've seen a couple of very positive comments.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful for these comments. Thank you all.
Yes.
And, yeah. I kind of feel like eventually the two of us, we're gonna have to play through Dread together. And try to be as open to it as possible. It's gonna be a bit hard with the story, but we're gonna try to even see the good in the story. And we're gonna try to have fun with Dread. And see what it can offer to us.
That'll be that's a good idea. We should do that.
Yeah, but first of all,
anyway,
yeah, we still have a lot to talk about here, and we don't know how the future of Metroid looks. If Retro Studios drops Prime 4 during the next E3, then we'll probably be too occupied to play Dread anytime soon. But
maybe,
you never know. You never know.
Have a nice day, everybody. Oh, I thought that's what you were saying.
Have a nice day, everybody.
I suppose, we can end it on that. Have a nice day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.